Your parents are not welcome in this room. If you don't like it, you can leave. What? Why? Why are you rejecting my parents like that? Just shut up. I don't like them, that's all. My mom says the same thing. She thinks they're awful. I don't want people like that in here. How? How can you say something like that? They are my parents. I felt my heart sink. I was so hurt that I wanted to cry. My husband and I loved each other, but if he was going to say things like this, I wasn't sure I could stay with him anymore. Anyway, I told you, they are not coming. If you don't like it, you can leave. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband hated my parents. He even called them awful. That was something I couldn't accept. Fine, I'm leaving. You're going to regret this. My name is Emily, and I'm 34 years old. I work in an office. I've been married to my husband, Jason, for 5 years. We both have jobs, but to save money, we live in a small, inexpensive apartment in the suburbs. Because we've been saving carefully for the past 5 years, we've built up a good amount of money. I've worked really hard for this. As I look at our savings, I can't help but smile. That's when Jason walks over, looking hesitant. Hey, we've saved up quite a bit. Maybe we should think about moving. The rent is cheap here, but the commute is long. I'd love to live somewhere closer to work. He looks at me like a puppy, hoping I'll say yes. I had originally planned for us to save a little longer, but I understand what he means. Right now, it takes 50 minutes to get to work. On days when I work late, I don't get home until very late at night. After that, I still have to cook and do laundry, so I always end up going to bed exhausted. This really isn't a healthy way to live. When I was younger, I didn't mind using my commute time for reading or listening to music. But now that I'm in my 30s, long commutes feel more tiring than enjoyable. You'd like to get home earlier too, right? He asks. And when we go out with friends, we wouldn't have to worry about getting home so late. Yeah, that's true. I agree. Since we live far from the city, missing the last train means taking an expensive cab ride home. Both Jason and I enjoy going out for drinks with friends and coworkers, so moving somewhere closer would make things easier. Maybe it really is time for a change. I decide to agree with Jason. His face immediately lights up. Yes, thank you. I'll find us a great place to live. I was the one who chose this apartment. Back then, our main goal was to find something cheap, even if it wasn't the most comfortable place. We got used to living here, but I understand why Jason would want something better. Since I made most of the decisions about this apartment, I think it's only fair that I let him take the lead this time. I trust him to find a good place for both of us. That's what I thought. This place looks nice, but I also like this one, Jason says, flipping through some brochures from the real estate office. I take a look. Wait. What? This place costs only $200, and this one is $300. That's way too cheap. That's not even enough for a decent one-bedroom apartment. I take a closer look. Jason, don't you think these places are a bit too expensive? The brochures show apartments costing $2,000 to $3,000 a month. He's looking at high-rise condos. What do you mean? These are the kind of places we should be looking at. I can't believe what I'm hearing. There are plenty of apartments closer to the city that are much cheaper. Suddenly, I start to feel uneasy. Is it really okay to let Jason handle this on his own? As I talk to him more, it becomes clear. He's not picking these places by himself. His mother, Linda, is involved. She's helping him look at apartments, giving her opinions, and deciding what's best for us. One day, I come home early since I don't have to work overtime. When I walk in, I see Jason and his mother, Linda, sitting together, flipping through brochures and chatting excitedly. Linda looks up and says, "Oh, you're home already? I wanted to keep looking at more places." I force a smile, but inside I'm annoyed. I don't want to see her. Linda and I don't get along. She makes snide comments and always tries to control everything. I head to my room, put down my bag, and change my clothes. As I do, I hear Linda saying goodbye at the door. "See you soon, Jason." It seems like she comes over when I'm not home. Since I work overtime more than Jason, I guess this has been happening a lot. But why is she even involved in choosing our apartment? Is she planning to move in with us? No way. I have to stop that at all costs. Even though I originally said I'd let Jason decide, I don't think I can agree to a place with such an expensive rent. Sure, I tend to be more careful with money than some people. But that doesn't mean we should throw away our savings on a place we can't afford. Jason, however, doesn't seem worried at all. He keeps looking at these high-priced apartments. Oh, this one looks perfect. It has everything we need, and it's not too expensive. He grins and waves the brochure excitedly. I take it from him and check the rent. $3,000 a month? How is that not too expensive? I've never lived in a place this pricey before. Is it really worth it? I hesitate. Hey, don't you think this is a little too much? What? No, we can afford it. We have our savings. Yeah, look at everything this place offers. It has great security, an amazing location, a supermarket nearby, a post office, and even a bank. It's big too. When you consider all that, the price is actually pretty reasonable. He sounds like a real estate agent trying to sell me something. I sigh. I don't think I can change his mind. In the end, I give in to his enthusiasm, and we sign the lease for the new apartment. And that's how our life in the high-rise condo begins. The apartment itself is beautiful, but I've never really felt comfortable here since we moved in. And the biggest reason for that, Linda. She comes over all the time and stays late into the night. Jason, I made steak and fries for dinner. Yes, my favorite. Thanks, Mom. I also made my special soup. Let me know if you want more. She moves around the kitchen like she owns the place, using all the appliances as if they were hers. And just like that, our new home doesn't feel like mine at all. Oh, I haven't made any for you, Emily, so you can cook your own food. Linda glares at me as she says this. No problem, I don't want to eat your cooking anyway. But the pans, knives, and cutting board she used are left in the sink. Why do I have to start my time at home after work by doing all the dishes? I almost say something, but I know it will only make things worse, so I stay quiet and head to the sink. It's so frustrating. It seems like one of the reasons Linda comes over so often is to show off our new high-rise condo to her neighbors. For a while, Jason keeps inviting his mom over. As for my parents, they haven't visited even once. Whenever I try to talk about them, Jason changes the subject. Jason's dad came over once, but after saying, I don't think I can really relax here, he never came back. Why can't Linda be like him? I'm honestly not happy with Jason's attitude. But I did say I would leave it up to him to find a place, and I agreed to live here, so I feel like I can't say too much. To be honest, I thought you would consider our life together as the priority. But since we moved here, it feels like his attitude toward me has changed. He used to be so kind, and I'm sure he would have stood up for me if Linda had treated me badly. But now, he just lets her do whatever, even when she says awful things to me. That's why Linda keeps getting worse with her behavior. You're home already? Are you really working? You're not lying to us and just messing around, are you? Of course not. I have a proper job. Since we moved here, the office is closer, so I get home earlier now. That's not my problem. Jason and I are having dinner. I can't stand the sight of you, so go to your room or leave. How can you say that? I live here too. You don't even live here. Why should I listen to you? I'm so angry that I snap back at her. Jason gets furious and says, How can you say that to my mom? Just do what she says. Now they're both yelling at me. I'm exhausted from work and I really don't want to deal with this, so I decide to leave and eat on my own. Late that night, when I think Linda has finally left, I come back home. This is pointless. I'm still coming home late, just like when I used to work overtime and return to the old apartment. I feel overwhelmed, so I ask Jason to come to the living room so we can talk. He looks irritated. Hey, can you ask your mom not to come over so much? Seriously, you're awful. Why are you treating my mom like that? She should treat me better. Stop being ridiculous. She comes over to help with the housework. We should be grateful. Okay, fine. Then I'll call my parents over sometime. My mom's a housewife and she's good with housework too. Jason looks enraged and yells, We are not having your parents over here. If you don't like it, then get out. What? Why? Why are you rejecting my parents like that? Shut up. I just don't like them. Mom says they're nasty. I'm not having people like that in this room. How can you say that? They're my parents. I'm so heartbroken that I feel like crying. Jason and I loved each other so much. But if he's saying things like this, I don't know if I can stay with him anymore. Anyway, you're not bringing your parents here. Like I said, If you don't listen to me, you're leaving. I can't understand my husband anymore. He says he hates my parents and calls them nasty. This is unacceptable. Okay, I'm leaving. You're going to regret this, you know. Jason snorts. Huh? Regret what? Just get out of here. You're the one who's going to regret this. He must be out of his mind to say that. I packed my things and head to my parents' house. Once I arrived, they asked me a million questions. Why are you here with so many bags? What happened between you and Jason? You just moved into your new place. But after all the questions, they hugged me and welcomed me home. I can't believe what Jason did to you. Why would he say something like that to you, Emily? Well, to be honest, we never really got along with his mom. Yeah, she has no manners. But for something like this, I think you need to talk it through with him. Emily, we're going to talk to Jason. What? We're going to speak to him. With that, Dad drives Mom and me back to the condo. I'd only been living here for 2 months, but now I'm coming back. We get to the condo, I take the key, get in the elevator, and go up to the 15th floor. I unlock the door and step inside, but something feels off. I see a woman's coat on the floor. Whose coat is that? I rush inside and open the living room door. There, I see my husband and an unfamiliar woman, completely naked and in the middle of their intimate moment. I stand there frozen as the door is wide open and they both scream. What are you doing? Emily? What? Why are you? I thought you left. Jason. What is the meaning of this? You brought your dad. The woman with him yells, Shut up, will you? We turn away so they can quickly put on clothes. After a few moments, we sit down and begin asking questions. It turns out they've been seeing each other for months and work together. Jason wanted to move closer to the office so he could spend more time with her. Unbelievable. At this point, I don't feel the need to argue anymore. Dad gives Jason a disgusted look. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce and compensation. Jason goes pale. The woman scoffs. Whatever. You're renting this place in your name, right, Jason? We can live here then, she says, completely missing the point. Yeah, I guess we could. Jason mutters, too proud to admit the truth. Goodbye then. Oh, and I'm taking the furniture and appliances I pay for with me, all right? I say as I walk out with my parents. A few days later, I arrange for a moving company to get my things, and I officially leave the condo. I file for divorce and compensation from both Jason and his girlfriend through my lawyer. At first, Jason refuses to pay, but my lawyer is top-notch. In the end, he has no choice but to agree to my terms. A month later, I get a call from an unknown number. I pick up, and it's a familiar voice. Linda. Emily, I'm so glad you picked up. Linda. Why are you calling me? Oh, I wanted to say I'm so sorry. I had no idea you were the one paying most of the rent for the condo. I want to apologize. Please come back. Jason can't afford the rent now, and he might get kicked out. His new girlfriend quit her job and doesn't do any housework. She doesn't listen to me, and the other day she almost slapped me. It was terrifying. I realized things were so much better when you were here. Her words make me feel sick. She just wants to have things her way. Sorry, that's not my problem. You figure it out. Goodbye. Wait, please. I hang up and immediately block her number. According to a mutual friend, Jason couldn't afford the rent and had to move out. As a result, his girlfriend dumped him too. Linda had been bragging to her neighbors about her son's life in a fancy condo. But when they found out I had been paying most of the rent and that Jason had to move out so soon, they all started laughing at her. Nobody takes her seriously anymore. Now she barely leaves her house. She got exactly what she deserved. As for me, I've moved into a small apartment, living a simple life. I'm saving up again, and it's adding up to a decent amount. I might even be able to retire a little early. I wonder why do some people pretend they earned everything on their own when it was really their spouse who made it all possible? Jason should have been grateful. In any case, I'm so glad Emily got to leave her awful ex-husband behind. I hope she meets someone so much better in the future. Thanks for sticking around until the end. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you in the next one.
Hi, I'm Emma Thompson, and this is the story of how an abandoned farm turned me from the family disappointment into someone my greedy relatives couldn't ignore. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places others consider worthless. I still remember the day of the will reading like it was yesterday. The mahogany-paneled law office felt suffocating as our family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, adjusted his glasses and began reading my parents' final wishes. The tragic car accident that took both of them had left a $50 million fortune to be divided between my sister Sarah and me. Or so I thought. To our beloved daughter Sarah, Mr. Harrison read, "We leave our investment portfolio, the family mansion, and all liquid assets." Sarah's perfectly lipsticked mouth curved into a triumphant smile. To Emma, he continued, his voice softening slightly, "We leave Grandpa Thompson's old farm property in Montana." The room fell silent. Then Sarah's laughter shattered it. "A farm?" she sneered, her designer bracelet jingling as she waved dismissively. "Oh, this is perfect." Little Emma always did prefer playing in the dirt to attending charity galas. I sat there, stunned. The 200-acre farm had been abandoned for 20 years, ever since Grandpa passed away. Dad had always called it worthless, refusing to even visit it. Now it was my only inheritance. "There must be some mistake," my Aunt Patricia interjected, her face pinched with concern that wasn't for me. Richard and Margaret would never leave their daughter with just dirt. Mr. Harrison shook his head. "The will is quite clear. The farm, including all structures and contents, belongs to Emma." Sarah stood up, smoothing her channel dress. "Well, sis, enjoy your barns and chickens. I've got a portfolio to manage." She paused at the door, her smile cruel. "Don't worry, if you need a loan, I'm sure we can work something out. After all, what's family for?" I left the law office that day with a single manila envelope containing the farm's deed and keys. 20 years of dust coated everything when I arrived at the property the next day. The main house was a weathered 2-story structure that had seen better days, but it was the massive old barn that caught my attention. Grandpa Thompson had been an odd man, brilliant but eccentric. He'd made his fortune in mining engineering before retiring to this farm, where he spent his last years tinkering in that barn. Dad always said the old man had lost his mind, wasting his genius on a worthless piece of land. The barn door groaned as I pushed it open. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating decades of cobwebs. Old farming equipment sat rusting in corners. But something felt off about the space. The dimensions didn't quite match the exterior. I remember following Grandpa here as a child, watching him disappear for hours behind a hidden door. "Our little secret," he'd whisper, winking. After his death, no one could find that door. Dad searched briefly before declaring it another of his father's delusions. But I remembered. 3 taps on the north wall, then pushed the 4th board from the bottom. My hands trembled as I followed the long-forgotten pattern. Click. A section of wall swung inward, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. My phone's flashlight illuminated the way down to a massive underground room. What I saw inside made my heart stop. Covering the walls were detailed geological surveys, mining charts, and chemical analyses. In the center sat a sophisticated testing lab, preserved under dust covers. But it was the safe in the corner that changed everything. The combination was my birthday. Grandpa never forgot it, even in his final days. Inside, I found a leather-bound journal and a USB drive. The journal's first page read, "To Emma, the only one who ever bothered to listen." As I read through his meticulous notes, tears filled my eyes. Grandpa hadn't lost his mind. He'd made a discovery that would reshape the entire mining industry. The worthless farm sat on top of one of the largest rare earth element deposits in North America. He developed a revolutionary extraction process that was both efficient and environmentally friendly. The USB drive contained detailed patents, already filed, but never activated. Grandpa had been waiting for the right moment, and the right person, to bring his discovery to life. My hands shook as I realized what this meant. The farm wasn't worthless. It was worth billions. But I knew that if my family found out, they'd try to take it from me. Sarah would hire the best lawyers, claim I wasn't competent to handle such a discovery. I needed to move carefully, protect myself before anyone realized what Grandpa had left me. I spent that night in the old house, reading through every page of his journal. In the morning, I made 3 calls to a patent lawyer, a mining engineer, and an investment banker I'd befriended during my own quiet years working in finance, a career my family had dismissed as modest. "Keep this absolutely confidential," I told each of them. "I'm about to show you something that will change everything." Over the next 6 months, I worked in secret. While Sarah posted photos of her luxury vacations and charity galas, I assembled a team of the industry's best minds. The old barn became our command center, its hidden lab modernized with cutting-edge equipment. "These patents are revolutionary," Dr. Chen, our lead engineer, explained during one late-night session. "Your grandfather's extraction process could make rare earth mining both profitable and environmentally sustainable. Do you realize what this means?" I did. With the growing demand for rare earth elements in everything from smartphones to electric vehicles, we were sitting on a gold mine. Literally and figuratively. We'd incorporated Thompson's sustainable resources quietly through a series of shell companies. I used my savings from years of careful investing to fund initial operations. Every step was calculated to keep my family in the dark. Then came Sarah's wedding, a lavish affair at the family mansion. I almost didn't attend, but I knew my absence would raise questions. "Oh, Emma," Sarah exclaimed with false warmth when I arrived. "How's farming going?" Her new husband, a hedge fund manager, snickered. "It's quite educational," I replied mildly. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask, how's the tech sector of your portfolio performing?" Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Why? Just curious. I heard rare earth element shortages are causing problems for manufacturers. Must be affecting stock prices." "I haven't checked recently," she admitted, clearly uncomfortable with her lack of knowledge. "You should look into it," I suggested, hiding my smile behind a champagne glass. The next morning, while Sarah jetted off to her honeymoon in the Maldives, we broke ground on our first extraction facility. By the time she returned 3 weeks later, Thompson Sustainable Resources had already secured contracts with 3 major tech manufacturers. The story broke in the Wall Street Journal. Revolutionary mining company disrupts rare earth market. My phone exploded with calls from family members as our company's value soared past $1 billion in its first public trading day. "Emma," Sarah's voice was shrill when she finally reached me. "Why didn't you tell us? We're family." "Are we?" I asked quietly. I thought I was just the girl who got dirt for her inheritance. The next few weeks were chaos. Sarah and Aunt Patricia tried to claim that Grandpa's patents should have been part of the family estate. Their lawyers argued that I had concealed valuable assets. But Grandpa had planned everything perfectly. His will explicitly stated that any halal contents of the farm, including any intellectual property developed there, belonged to me. The hidden lab's existence proved he developed everything on the farm property. The final showdown came at an emergency family meeting called by Aunt Patricia. They all sat around the massive dining table in the mansion, the same table where they'd once mocked my modest career choices. "You have to understand," Sarah pleaded, her designer bracelets clinking nervously. "Dad would have wanted the family to share in this." I pulled out Grandpa's journal, opening to a marked page. "Dear Emma," I read aloud, "I'm leaving you this farm because you're the only one who saw its value beyond dollar signs. Your father and sister chase wealth, but you chased knowledge. That's why you'll succeed where they failed." The room fell silent. "You know what the difference is between us, Sarah?" I continued, closing the journal. "When you got the family fortune, I congratulated you. When I built something of my own, you tried to take it. We can work something out," she began, but I cut her off. "Actually, we can't, but I will give you some free advice. Invest in sustainable technology. Thomson Sustainable Resources is about to announce a major expansion." As I walked out of the mansion, Aunt Patricia called after me. "Your parents would be ashamed of how selfish you're being." I turned back one last time. "No, they'd be ashamed. They never saw what Grandpa saw in me. But that's their loss. Just like this company is your loss." Today, Thomson Sustainable Resources is valued at $12 billion. We're revolutionizing the mining industry while protecting the environment. The old farm has become a state-of-the-art research facility, though I kept the barn exactly as Grandpa left it, secret room and all. Sarah still tries to reconcile occasionally, usually when she needs something. Last month, she called about investing in our latest venture. I had my assistant direct her to our public investor relations line. The family mansion was recently put up for sale. Sarah's risky investments and lavish lifestyle had finally caught up with her. I bought it through a shell company and turned it into a science education center for underprivileged kids. Yesterday, I received an invitation to speak at my old high school's graduation ceremony. The topic? Finding value in unexpected places. I accepted immediately, already planning my speech. After all, sometimes the greatest fortune isn't what you're given, but what you discover when everyone else has stopped looking. As for the old farm, I still live in Grandpa's house, though I've renovated it thoughtfully. Every morning, I walk to the barn and tap that secret panel, remembering the man who saw past appearances to true value, both in the land and in me. They say success is the best revenge, but I've learned it's not about revenge at all. It's about proving that true worth isn't in what you inherit, but in what you create. And sometimes, the most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's the wisdom to see what others miss.
I never thought I'd end up working at Sterling Corp, one of the biggest tech companies in Seattle. Growing up in a small town in Idaho, raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs, corporate life seemed like a distant dream. But here I was, Sarah Collins, 26 years old, sitting at my desk on the 47th floor of Sterling Tower. Well, technically, it was a cubicle, a very small cubicle. "Collins, where's the Johnson report?" I flinched at the sharp voice of Diana Pierce, my immediate supervisor and personal tormentor for the past year. She stood at my cubicle entrance, designer heels tapping impatiently, perfect blonde hair swept into a severe bun. "I sent it 10 minutes ago, Ms. Pierce," I replied, pulling up my sent emails. "Should be in your inbox." Diana's perfectly penciled eyebrows drew together. "I don't see it. Send it again. And fix those margins this time. They're atrocious." The margins were exactly as she'd specified in her last 3 memos about proper document formatting, but I knew better than to argue. "Right away, Ms. Pierce." As she clicked away, I heard the whispers from nearby cubicles. Everyone knew Diana had it out for me, but no one knew why. Maybe it was my Target clearance rack clothes among their designer suits. Maybe it was my state school degree among their Ivy League credentials. Or maybe some people just needed someone to look down on to feel better about themselves. "Don't let her get to you," whispered Maria from the next cubicle. She was one of the few friends I'd made here, a fellow outsider in a corporate jungle. "She's just mad because Roberts praised your presentation in the morning meeting." I managed a small smile, but my hands were shaking as I resent the report. One wrong move, one tiny mistake, and Diana would have the excuse she needed to fire me. I couldn't lose this job. Not with Mom's medical bills piling up back home. The next few hours passed in a blur of spreadsheets and passive-aggressive emails from Diana. By 6 p.m., the office was nearly empty, but I was still at my desk, triple-checking a presentation for tomorrow's client meeting. "Still here, Collins? No plans for Friday night?" Diana's mocking voice made me jump. She stood there with her designer bag, clearly headed out. "Just finishing up the Wilson presentation," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She examined her manicure. "Don't forget about tomorrow's office party. Attendance is mandatory. Try to wear something appropriate this time." My cheeks burned remembering last month's team lunch where she loudly commented on my discount store fashion sense in front of everyone. After she left, I slumped in my chair, fighting back tears. The office party. Another chance for Diana to remind everyone that I didn't belong in her world. "Rough day?" The gentle voice startled me. A young woman stood by my cubicle, someone I'd never seen before. She looked about my age, with warm brown eyes and a friendly smile. Her clothes were simple: jeans, a sweater, and comfortable flats, making her stand out among Sterling Corp's usual power suits. "I'm Emma," she said, perching casually on the edge of my desk. "Just started in marketing today." "Sarah Collins," I managed, quickly wiping my eyes. "Welcome to Sterling Corp." "Thanks." She glanced at my computer screen. "The Wilson presentation." I nodded miserably. My boss wants it perfect for Monday's meeting. "Ah, Diana Pierce." Emma's eyes twinkled. "I heard about her. Quite the reputation." That's one way to put it. I found myself relaxing despite everything. There was something about Emma that made her easy to talk to. "Hey, want to grab coffee? I know a great little place around the corner. You look like you could use a break." I hesitated, looking at my screen. "The presentation will still be there in an hour," Emma said gently. "Come on." My treat. Something in her voice made me nod. Grabbing my coat, I followed her to a cozy cafe I'd walked past 100 times but never entered. Over steaming lattes, Emma proved to be an excellent listener. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything about growing up poor, about Mom's illness, about landing this job and Diana's constant harassment. "Why don't you report her?" Emma asked, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. I laughed bitterly. "To who? She's untouchable. Her father plays golf with half the board members. Besides, I need this job." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "No one's untouchable, Sarah. Trust me on that." There was something in her tone that made me look at her more closely, but she quickly changed the subject, asking about my work in the marketing department. By the time we left the cafe, I felt lighter somehow. Emma had that effect, making problems seem more manageable just by listening. "See you at the party tomorrow?" she asked as we parted ways. I grimaced. "Unfortunately, have to find something appropriate to wear first." Emma's smile turned mysterious. "Don't worry about that. Just be yourself. Sometimes things have a way of working out." I should have known then that Emma wasn't just another new employee. Should have noticed how the security guard straightened up when she passed, how she navigated the building with the confidence of someone who'd known it for years. But I didn't. I was too preoccupied with surviving another day in Diana's world. The next evening, I stood in front of my apartment mirror, trying to make my only nice dress look more expensive than it was. The office party was being held at the Vista, one of Seattle's most exclusive rooftop restaurants. Another chance for Diana to remind me I didn't belong. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Don't be nervous. Tonight's going to be interesting." I didn't know then just how right she was. Didn't know that in a few hours everything would change. That Diana Pierce was about to learn a very expensive lesson about judging people. The Vista's rooftop restaurant took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of Seattle's skyline. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and champagne flowed freely among the well-dressed crowd. I felt painfully out of place in my simple black dress from last year's clearance rack. Well, Diana's voice dripped with disdain. You actually showed up, Collins, and in the same dress you wore to last year's holiday party. How economical of you. She stood with a group of senior managers, all of them smirking at her comment. Her own dress probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. Thank you for noticing, Ms. Pierce. I managed, gripping my water glass tightly. I couldn't afford to lose my temper. Not here, not now. You know, Diana continued loudly, clearly enjoying her audience. Some people just don't understand corporate culture. They think they can walk in from their little small-town lives and fit in at a company like Sterling Corp. She looked me up and down meaningfully. But class and sophistication can't be bought at Target, can they? Laughter rippled through her group. My face burned with humiliation. I should go check on the Wilson presentation, I mumbled, turning to leave. Oh yes, run back to your little cubicle, Diana called after me. That's where poor people like you belong. Not here among actual professionals. I was nearly at the elevator when a familiar voice stopped me. Leaving so soon? Emma stood there, but not in the casual clothes I'd seen her in yesterday. Tonight she wore a stunning red designer dress that made my simple black one look like a dish rag. Yet somehow, her warm smile was exactly the same. I don't belong here, I whispered, fighting back tears. Actually, Emma's eyes sparkled with mischief. You belong here more than most. Come with me. Before I could protest, she linked her arm through mine and led me back into the party. Diana was still holding court near the windows, regaling her audience with what I assumed were more jokes at my expense. Miss Pierce, Emma called out clearly. The room suddenly went quiet. Diana turned, her practiced smile freezing when she saw Emma. I'm sorry, you are? Emma Sterling, my new friend replied calmly. Though you probably know me better as Robert Sterling's daughter. You know, your CEO. The champagne glass in Diana's hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. They were all too busy staring at Emma in shock. I was staring too. Emma Sterling, the Emma Sterling. Heir to Sterling Corp and notorious for working incognito in different departments to learn the business from the ground up. Miss Sterling. Diana's face had gone from smug to sickly pale in seconds. I had no idea you were. We weren't expecting. Clearly, Emma's voice was arctic. I spent the past month observing various departments, Ms. Pierce, getting to know our employees, their strengths, their challenges. Her eyes hardened. Their bullies. The silence in the room was deafening. I've seen how you treat people you consider beneath you. Emma continued, particularly Sarah Collins, one of our most promising young marketing analysts. Did you know her campaign proposals have increased our social media engagement by 47% this quarter? Or were you too busy criticizing her clothes to notice her work? Diana's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I was just maintaining professional standards. Professional standards? Emma's laugh was sharp. Let's talk about professional standards, Miss Pierce. Like using company resources to plan your personal vacation, or taking credit for your subordinates' work, or the fact that your father's golf buddies on the board can't protect you anymore because they all retired last month. The color drained from Diana's face completely. Your services at Sterling Corp are no longer required, Emma stated flatly. Security will escort you to clear out your desk. Your replacement starts Monday. She paused, then added with a hint of satisfaction. I believe you know her. Sarah Collins? My head spun. What was happening? You can't do this. Diana sputtered. My father. Your father already agreed to your termination when I showed him the evidence. Emma cut in. He was quite embarrassed, actually. Now I believe security is waiting. 2 security guards materialized as if by magic. Diana looked around wildly, but her former sycophants were suddenly very interested in their shoes. As she was led away, Emma turned to address the stunned crowd. Sterling Corp's success was built on innovation, integrity, and treating people with respect. Anyone who can't embrace those values should follow Ms. Pierce's example and leave. Now, the room quickly emptied, leaving just Emma and me. You planned this? I managed finally. Emma grinned. I've been working undercover in different departments for 6 months, evaluating our corporate culture. Diana Pierce wasn't the only toxic manager we found, but she was by far the worst. She squeezed my hand. Your promotion is real, by the way. Your work caught my eye weeks ago, before I even met you. But why? I gestured helplessly at everything. Because talent and hard work matter more than designer labels, Emma said firmly. Because I grew up watching people like Diana Pierce make life miserable for people like you. Because Sterling Corp needs leaders who lift others up, not tear them down. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, Emma laughed. Wait until you see your new office, and your new salary. She linked her arm through mine again. Come on, let's get out of here. That little cafe is still open, and I think this calls for celebration lats. As we left the vista, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Diana had been right about one thing. I didn't belong in her world of petty bullying and social climbing. I belonged in something better. 3 months later, my marketing team's latest campaign won an industry award. I accepted it wearing a Target dress, standing next to Emma in her designer gown. We both smiled for the cameras, ignoring the whispers about my inappropriate attire. Because we knew something the whispers didn't. Success isn't about where your clothes come from or who your parents know. It's about what you bring to the table. As for Diana, last I heard, she was working at a small firm in Tacoma. Apparently, her father's golf connections weren't as useful as they used to be. Emma and I still meet at that little cafe every week, planning Sterling Corp's future over lats. She's still the same person who sat on my desk that Friday evening, kind, genuine, and completely unimpressed by designer labels. And me? I still shop at Target, but now I do it from my corner office on the 50th floor. Sometimes life has a way of putting bullies in their place. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say enough. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you think is just a friendly new colleague turns out to be exactly who you needed in your corner all along. Life has a funny way of revealing the truth about people, especially when there's money involved. I never thought my own sister would try to legally declare me dead. But I guess $12 million can make people do crazy things. I'm Emma Chen, 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my life. I was raised by my mom, Lisa Chen, after my father supposedly abandoned us before I was born. My half-sister, Rachel, came along when Mom remarried Jack Wilson when I was 4. We grew up in a modest home in Boston, and while we weren't poor, Mom always emphasized the importance of education and hard work. What none of us knew was that my biological father, David Thompson, had been searching for us for years. Mom had disappeared while pregnant with me, thinking she was protecting us from what she believed was his controlling family. The truth, as I would later learn, was far more complicated. But let me start with the day everything changed. I'd spent the last 5 years building my photography career, traveling to remote corners of the world capturing images for National Geographic and other major publications. My latest assignment took me to the Himalayan mountains, documenting traditional villages that were adapting to climate change. It was challenging work. No reliable phone service, spotty internet at best, and days of hiking between locations. Rachel had always been jealous of my glamorous career, though she never understood the countless nights I spent sleeping on frozen ground or the years of unpaid internships it took to get here. She chose a different path, working as a real estate agent and marrying Tom, a struggling day trader with expensive tastes. The last time I spoke to Mom was 3 months into my assignment. She sounded strange on our satellite phone call, emotional but trying to hide it. Emma, honey, she said, her voice crackling through the poor connection. There's something important I need to tell you when you get back. Something about your father. Mom, you're breaking up. I replied, struggling to hear her through the static. Is everything okay? Yes, just come home soon. I love you. Those were her last words to me. 2 weeks later, while I was in a remote village with no communication, Mom had a sudden heart attack. By the time I made it back to civilization and checked my messages, she had been gone for 10 days. I immediately began the long journey home, but travel from remote Nepal isn't simple. Delayed flights, missed connections, and monsoon weather stretched my return into a 3-week ordeal. What I didn't know was that Rachel had already set her plan in motion. You see, 6 months before Mom's death, she'd received a letter from a prestigious law firm. My biological father, David Thompson, had finally tracked us down. He was a federal judge now and had never stopped looking for us. More importantly, he'd recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to make things right. He'd set up a trust fund for me, $12 million, plus properties in 3 states. Mom had been processing this information, trying to figure out how to tell me the truth about my father when she passed away. Rachel found the letter while going through Mom's papers. And that's when she saw her opportunity. While I was desperately trying to get home, Rachel was convincing everyone that I had died in a hiking accident in Nepal. She used her real estate connections to create false documentation, took advantage of the language barrier and poor communication with local authorities, and even held a memorial service with an empty casket. My poor sister, she'd sobbed to the mourners. At least she died doing what she loved. By the time I finally made it back to Boston, Rachel had already filed papers to claim the inheritance as my only surviving sibling. She'd even moved into one of the properties left in the trust. I'll never forget the moment I walked into my childhood home. Rachel was sitting in the living room with Tom, surrounded by papers from the law firm, when I opened the door with my key. The color drained from her face as if she'd seen a ghost, which in her mind she had. Emma, she stammered, dropping her coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor Mom had been so proud of. You're supposed to be dead. I finished for her, setting down my weathered backpack. Funny thing about that, I'm very much alive. Tom bolted from the room, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rachel's shock quickly turned to calculation. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to spin this. Emma, thank God. She jumped up, arms open for a hug I didn't return. We thought. There was a report from Naples. We were devastated. I've been trying to handle all the legal matters for you, to protect your interests. Really? I pulled out my phone, showing her the emails I discovered on Mom's computer. Is that why you told the law firm I died in a climbing accident? Why you've been trying to claim my inheritance? I can explain, she sputtered. It's not what you think. But I wasn't interested in her explanations. I'd spent the flight home doing my research, making calls, and uncovering every detail of her scheme. What I discovered wasn't just fraud, it was a calculated plan that had started even before Mom's death. What Rachel didn't know, what none of us had known, was that I wasn't the only one who had inherited my biological father's methodical nature and attention to detail. And I was about to show my dear sister exactly what that meant. Pack your bags, I said calmly, pulling out a formal-looking document. You have 24 hours to vacate this property, and Rachel? Don't bother trying to run. The FBI is already investigating the false death reports you filed. She lunged for the document in my hand, but I stepped back. You can't prove anything. It was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect our family's interests. I smiled, thinking of the meeting I had scheduled for the next morning. Actually, I can prove everything. And you're about to learn exactly who you've been trying to steal from. What happened next would shake our family to its core, expose decades of secrets, and lead to a courtroom confrontation that nobody saw coming. But that's where the real story begins. The next morning, I walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Boston, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Rachel had spent the night calling everyone she knew, trying to find a lawyer willing to defend her misunderstanding. She'd even tried convincing our stepdad, Jack, to reason with me. Emma, please, he'd begged over the phone. Rachel made a mistake, but she's still your sister. No, Jack, I'd replied firmly. A mistake is accidentally damaging someone's car. She tried to legally declare me dead. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd already been in contact with Judge David Thompson's office. When I couldn't reach Mom during my trip, I finally opened that email I'd been avoiding. The one from the law firm explaining my father's search for me. After confirming Mom's death, I'd reached out to them. The security guard at the courthouse entrance did a double take when he checked my ID. Miss Chen, or should I say Miss Thompson, he said with a knowing smile. You look just like your father. I was directed to a private chamber where a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 60s stood looking out the window. He turned as I entered, and I felt my breath catch. It was like looking at an older, male version of myself. We had the same sharp green eyes, the same way of tilting our heads when studying something. Emma, he breathed, taking a step forward but stopping himself. I've waited so long. Tears filled my eyes. Why didn't you find us sooner? I tried. God, I tried. He sank into a leather chair, gesturing for me to sit. Your mother. Lisa was trying to protect you. My family back then. My father, he was a controlling man. Lisa thought he tried to take you away from her, raise you as the proper Thompson here. She didn't know he was dying, that things were about to change. For the next hour, he filled in the gaps of my history. How he'd hired private investigators, how he'd finally reformed his family's old money attitudes as he rose through the legal ranks. How finding that first photo of me in National Geographic had given him hope. When I got sick, he continued, I knew I had to move faster. The inheritance was never about the money. It was about giving you the security I should have provided all along. A knock at the door interrupted us. Judge Thompson. They're ready. He squeezed my hand. Ready to face your sister. I nodded. More than ready. The courtroom was packed. News of a federal judge's long-lost daughter and attempted inheritance fraud had spread quickly. Rachel sat at the defendant's table, wearing her most modest black dress, clearly going for a grieving sister image. Her expensive lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Then my father took the bench and everything changed. Rachel's face went from practiced sorrow to shock as she looked between Judge Thompson and me, finally seeing the obvious resemblance. Her lawyer's whispers became more frantic. This emergency hearing will address the fraudulent death declaration of Emma Chin, also known as Emma Thompson, and the attempted theft of her inheritance through false documentation. My father began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. Rachel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we request you recuse yourself due to obvious conflict of interest. Already arranged, my father replied calmly. Judge Martinez will be here momentarily to proceed. I simply wanted to be present for this opening statement. He turned to Rachel, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Ms. Wilson, when you attempted to have your sister declared dead, did you ever wonder why a federal judge would leave such a substantial inheritance to a photographer he never met? Rachel's carefully constructed facade cracked. I didn't. No, you didn't think, he continued. You saw an opportunity and took it, never questioning why I would track down your sister after 29 years. Never wondering why we have the same eyes, the same expressions. Never considering that I trying to steal from her, you were attempting to defraud a federal judge's daughter. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Martinez arrived and the real proceedings began. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel had forged documents, bribed officials in Nepal, and even created fake death certificates. She'd planned it all while Mom was still alive, waiting for an opportunity. But the biggest shock came when Tham, Rachel's husband, took the stand. She started planning it months ago, he testified, avoiding Rachel's murderous glare. When she found out about Emma's real father being Judge Thompson, she became obsessed. Said it wasn't fair that Emma got everything just for being born to the right father. She even suggested we should adopt Emma's future share of Mom's estate since dead people can't inherit. I watched my sister crumble as her husband betrayed her, as her schemes were exposed one by one. The woman who'd once been my childhood playmate, who borrowed my clothes and shared my secrets, was revealed as a stranger. The judge's verdict was swift and severe. Rachel was facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and filing false reports. She'd have to repay all the money she'd spent from the properties she'd illegally occupied. Her real estate license was suspended pending further investigation. But it was our stepfather's words in the hallway afterward that truly ended things. Your mother, Jack said, tears in his eyes. She wanted to tell you about Judge Thompson for years. She was so proud of you, Emma. Rachel, she knew that. She knew and still chose to do this. I can't defend her anymore. Rachel was led away in handcuffs, sobbing not from remorse, but from being caught. As she passed me, she hissed, You think you're better than me now? With your fancy real father and millions? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt only pity. I was never competing with you, Rachel. You were the only one keeping score. The aftermath changed everything. Judge Thompson, Dad, and I began the slow process of building a relationship. He retired from the bench to focus on his health and making up for lost time. The treatments were working better than expected, giving us precious months to connect. I kept my photography career but established a foundation in Mom's name, providing scholarships for young photographers from underprivileged backgrounds. One of Dad's properties became a gallery showcasing their work. Rachel was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her crimes. Tom filed for divorce and cooperated with authorities in exchange for leniency. Jack visits her sometimes, but our family will never be the same. Last week, I found an old photo album in Mom's things. There was a picture of Rachel and me as kids, grinning with ice cream-covered faces, genuinely happy in each other's company. I thought about showing it to her during visiting hours, but decided against it. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But other things, like my newfound relationship with my father, prove that it's never too late for a new beginning. Dad and I often sit in his study, sharing stories and making up for lost time. You know, he said recently, your mother was right to be worried about my family back then. But she was wrong about one thing. Running away didn't prevent you from becoming a Thompson. You've got our spirit, our sense of justice. I smiled, thinking of the long road that led us here. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And who am I? I'm Emma Chin Thompson, daughter of a mother who protected me and a father who never stopped searching. I'm a photographer who captures truth through my lens and a woman who learned that real family isn't about blood or money, it's about choice. As for Rachel, I heard she's writing a memoir in prison about family betrayal. I wish her well, but some stories don't need to be rewritten. Sometimes the truth is enough. I always knew I was adopted. My father, James Richardson, never hid that fact from me. What my sister Catherine didn't know was that being adopted wasn't the only secret in our family. I'm Emma Chin, and at 32, I became the CEO of Richardson Global Enterprises, a fact that sent my sister into a very public meltdown. But let me start from the beginning. Dad adopted me when I was 6 after my biological parents died in a car accident in Hong Kong. He was there closing a business deal and visited the orphanage as part of his charitable works. Something about the quiet Asian girl reading advanced mathematics books in the corner caught his attention. 3 months later, I had a new home, a new sister, and a father who saw something in me that would change both our lives. Catherine, 2 years older than me, never accepted my presence. Where Dad saw potential, she saw competition. While I was diving into business books and learning about investments, she was focused on being the perfect socialite, the natural heir to the Richardson name. Blood will always matter more than paper, she'd say when Dad wasn't around. What none of them knew was that Dad had been preparing me to take over his company since I was 12. Those weren't just casual conversations about business over breakfast. They were carefully planned lessons. The summer internships weren't just to keep me busy. They were training grounds. By the time I finished my MBA, I knew every aspect of Richardson Global Enterprises intimately. Dad kept my training secret, not out of shame, but strategy. The business world is like a chess game, Emma, he'd tell me. The best moves are the ones your opponents don't see coming. Catherine married Trevor Williams, heir to a banking fortune, in what society pages called the merger of the decade. The fact that Trevor's bank was secretly struggling under bad investments wasn't public knowledge yet. But Dad and I knew. We'd been quietly buying up their debt through shell companies for months. When Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, he called me to his study one night. "It's time," he said, handing me a thick envelope. "Everything's prepared. Just remember what I taught you. Patience is the deadliest weapon in business." He died 3 weeks later. The funeral was exactly as Catherine wanted it, lavish, public, and designed to emphasize her position as the grieving daughter. I sat quietly in the back, as she'd instructed. "No need to confuse people about your place in the family," she'd said with a cold smile. After the service, during the reception at our family estate, Catherine made her move. She clinked her glass for attention, her black designer dress perfectly coordinating with her crocodile tears. "I want to thank everyone for coming to honor my father," she began, emphasizing the my. Family meant everything to him, and as his only true child, I know he'd want us to be honest today. She turned to me, her smile razor sharp. "Emma, dear, I think it's time we stopped pretending. You were a charity case, a tax write-off Dad's accountant suggested. You're not real family, and it's time for you to go." The room fell silent. 200 of New York's elite waited for my response. Trevor smirked beside his wife, probably already spending the inheritance in his head. I stood slowly, straightened my simple black dress, and smiled. "Of course, Catherine. You're right, we should stop pretending." I walked to the door, then turned back. "See you at the will reading." "Don't bother," she called after me. Dad's lawyers already confirmed everything goes to his real heir. I just smiled again. "We'll see." 2 days later, In the Richardson Global Enterprises main conference room, Catherine's perfect world imploded. "This is the last will and testament of James Patrick Richardson," the lawyer began. Catherine sat at the head of the table, already holding a pen to sign the transfer papers. "To my daughter Catherine," the lawyer read, "I leave the following. Your trust fund will continue untouched, providing you the same monthly allowance you currently receive." Catherine's smile faltered. "That's it. Where's the rest?" "To my daughter Emma," the lawyer continued, "I leave controlling interest in Richardson Global Enterprises, all associated companies, properties, and assets, effective immediately." The pen fell from Catherine's hand. "That's impossible. She's not even a Richardson." "Actually, I spoke for the first time. I am. Dad legally changed my name years ago, and I've been serving as the company's shadow CEO for the past 5 years." "No," Catherine whispered. "No, no, no. Security," I pressed the intercom button. "Please escort Ms. Williams out of the building. Her access has been revoked." As security approached, Catherine knocked over her chair. "You can't do this. I'm his real daughter." "Being real family," I said quietly, "isn't about blood, Catherine. It's about trust, loyalty, and vision. Dad understood that. I'm sorry you never did." "I'll fight this," she screamed as security led her out. "You'll never get away with stealing my birthright." I sat down in the CEO's chair, my chair. Actually, I already have. The real war, I knew, was just beginning. But Dad had taught me well, and I had plans Catherine couldn't even imagine. As her screams echoed down the hallway, I opened my laptop and began the changes that would reshape the Richardson empire, starting with the Williams family bank. Catherine's meltdown hit social media before she even reached her car. Someone in the conference room had recorded her screaming about her fake sister stealing her birthright, and the video spread like wildfire. Within hours, #Richardson drama was trending, with people divided between supporting the rightful blood heir and the secret CEO sister. I watched it unfold from Dad's old office, my office now, while signing the papers that would begin Catherine's financial ruin. She'd made her choice at the funeral. Now she'd learned why Dad had always said I was the better strategist. Her first move came the next morning, a lawsuit challenging the will, claiming I'd manipulated our father during his illness. Her lawyers filed emergency papers to freeze the company's assets. I'd been expecting this. In fact, I counted on it. "Release the documents," I instructed my legal team. Within hours, every major news outlet received copies of my official adoption papers, my legal name changed to Emma Richardson Chin, and most devastatingly, video recordings of Dad explaining his succession choice. He'd made them during his last months, knowing Catherine would challenge the will. "I choose Emma," he said in the video, looking directly at the camera, "not because Catherine is inadequate, but because Emma is exceptional. She's been running this company in shadow for 5 years, turning record profits while her sister was planning charity galas. Blood doesn't make a CEO, vision does." Catherine's lawsuit was dismissed within days. But I wasn't done. Remember those shell companies buying up Williams' bank debt? The day after Catherine's lawsuit failed, Richardson Global called in all the loans. Trevor's family bank, already struggling, faced immediate bankruptcy. Catherine showed up at my office, her designer outfit slightly wrinkled. A telling detail for someone who'd never had a hair out of place. "You vindictive bitch," she spat. "You're destroying Trevor's family." I looked up from my computer. "Actually, you did that when you kicked me out of Dad's funeral. Actions have consequences, Catherine. Dad taught us that, remember? Well, one of us was paying attention. He was my father. He was our father. But while you were playing society princess, I was learning to run his empire. Did you really think those summer internships were just to keep me busy? That all those breakfast meetings were just casual conversations?" Her face paled. "Those were training sessions. Every single one. Dad knew who he wanted as his successor by the time I was 12. The adoption, the name change, the secret training. It was all part of his plan. You could have been part of it too, if you'd ever shown any interest in anything beyond your trust fund. I'll tell everyone," she threatened, "about how you manipulated him, turned him against his real daughter." "Go ahead," I interrupted, turning my laptop to show her the screen. "These are the records of every transaction from your trust fund for the past 5 years. The private shopping sprees disguised as charity donations. The business meetings that were actually spa days. Oh, and let's not forget the interesting transfers to Trevor's personal account. The ones that started right after you discovered his bank was failing. She sank into a chair. How did you? I told you. I've been running this company for 5 years. Did you think I wouldn't monitor the trust funds? Dad knew about all of it. He just wanted to see if he'd ever come clean. The next phase of my plan unfolded over the following weeks. As Williams' bank collapsed, Richardson Global swooped in to save it, at the cost of Trevor's family losing control. Catherine and Trevor were forced to sell their mansion, their cars, their vacation homes. Their society friends disappeared as quickly as their wealth. Funny how that happens. But the real twist came during the shareholders' meeting 3 months later. As I presented the company's record profits under my official leadership, Catherine made one last desperate play. She burst into the meeting, waving papers. I have proof, she screamed. Proof that she's been manipulating company funds. Security moved to remove her, but I held up my hand. Let her speak. The documents she brought were actually plans I'd leaked through a carefully chosen channel, plans showing massive transfers of company funds. What Catherine hadn't realized was that they were records of her own embezzlement, done through proxy accounts she thought were untraceable. These transfers, she announced triumphantly, prove that Emma has been stealing from the company. Interesting, I replied calmly, because those transfers align perfectly with deposits made to these accounts. I projected a new set of documents on the screen. Accounts registered to Catherine Williams and Trevor Williams. The room erupted in chaos. Catherine's face went from triumphant to horrified as she realized she'd just publicly implicated herself in financial fraud. You set me up, she whispered. No, Catherine, you set yourself up. I just made sure everyone could see it. The SEC investigation was brief but thorough. Catherine and Trevor were indicted on multiple counts of financial fraud. Their remaining assets were frozen. The trust fund, their last financial lifeline, was suspended pending criminal investigation. Dad would have appreciated the symmetry. The sister who'd relied on blood ties losing everything to the sister who learned strategy. 1 year later, I sat in my office reviewing the latest acquisition proposals. Richardson Global had doubled in size under my leadership, expanding into new markets while maintaining the ethical business practices Dad had valued. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Catherine had taken a plea deal. 2 years in a minimum security prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Trevor had fled to a non-extradition country, leaving her to face the charges alone. I picked up the photo on my desk. Dad and me at my college graduation, both of us smiling, sharing a secret the world wouldn't understand for years. You were right, Dad, I whispered. Patience is the deadliest weapon. A notification popped up on my screen. Catherine's auction house was selling her remaining possessions to pay legal fees. Among the items, a family photo album listed as Richardson Family Memories. I bought it anonymously and had it delivered to her prison cell with a note. Blood isn't what makes a family. Trust is. You never understood the difference. The media eventually moved on to other scandals, other family dramas. Richardson Global continued to thrive, its adopted CEO becoming known for both business acumen and philanthropic work, particularly supporting adoption agencies and educational programs for orphan children. Every year, on Dad's birthday, I visit his grave alone. I leave 2 things, fresh flowers and a copy of the company's annual report. Last year, I added a 3rd item, a newspaper clipping about Catherine's sentence with a simple note. You taught me well, Dad. The best moves really are the ones they never see coming. Catherine gets out of prison next year. Her trust fund is gone. Her society friends have forgotten her. And her husband is sipping cocktails somewhere without an extradition treaty. Me? I'm in Dad's old office, my office, planning the company's next expansion. There's a new photo on my desk now, next to the graduation picture. Me with a group of business students I mentor. All of them adopted. All of them learning what Dad taught me. That family isn't about blood. It's about choice. And sometimes the family you choose is better than the family you're born into. Just ask Catherine. I'm sure she has plenty of time to think about that now. I straightened my tie, checking one last time that my presentation materials were perfect. Tonight's family dinner at my sister Rebecca's mansion was more than just a gathering. It was my chance to finally prove myself. After years of working in silence, making strategic investments through my company Griffin Capital. I was ready to pitch my biggest venture yet. I just needed backing from Monarch Bank, where my brother-in-law, Marcus Williams, served as executive vice president. The irony wasn't lost on me. 10 years ago, Marcus had been the one to deny my first business loan, calling my ideas childish fantasies. Now he paraded around at every family function, reminding everyone how he'd saved my sister from her struggling family by marrying her. James, Rebecca greeted me at the door, air kissing my cheek. My little sister had changed since marrying into the Williams banking dynasty. The warm girl who used to defend me against schoolyard bullies was now more interested in social climbing than family loyalty. "You're looking professional," she said, eyeing my off-the-rack suit with barely concealed disappointment. "Marcus just got back from Milan. Wait till you see his new Italian suits." The dining room was a monument to new money trying to look old. Crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, and what I suspected were reproduction paintings pretending to be originals. Marcus sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. "James, the small business genius graces us with his presence," Marcus called out, drawing laughs from the other guests, all bank executives and their wives. "Still running that little investment firm of yours? What was it called?" "Pigeon Capital." "Griffin Capital," I corrected quietly, setting up my laptop. "And actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. I have a proposal." "Oh God, not another one of your proposals," Marcus groaned dramatically. "Remember his last idea, honey? What was it? Affordable housing developments. As if anyone wants to invest in that." Rebecca giggled nervously. "James, maybe this isn't the right time. The proposal is solid," I pressed on. "A $2 billion development project. Sustainable housing, commercial spaces, community facilities. All we need is financing from Monarch Bank." Marcus nearly choked on his wine. $2 billion? Have you lost your mind?" He started laughing, and others joined in. "You can barely afford that suit, and you want to play with billions." "The numbers work," I insisted, pulling up my presentation. "If you just look." "Enough." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "You want to know why you'll never succeed? Because you don't understand how this world works. Real business isn't about helping people or building communities. It's about power. And you, dear brother-in-law, have none." He stood up, straightening his Italian suit. "Tomorrow morning, I'm presenting to Monarch Bank's board about our latest acquisition. Real business, big business, something you'll never understand. So stick to your small dreams, James. It's all you're good for." As forced laughter filled the room, my phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. "Documents confirmed. Transfer complete. You now own 51% of Monarch Bank's shares. Board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Ready to meet your new employees?" I looked up at Marcus, still laughing at his own joke, and allowed myself a small smile. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. I arrived at Monarch Bank's headquarters at 8:45 a.m., wearing the same off-the-rack suit from last night. The security guard did a double take when I walked in. He was used to turning me away from Marcus's floor. "Mr. Griffin." My lawyer, Sarah Chen, waited by the elevators. "Everything's in place. The board members have arrived early, eager to hear about Marcus's big announcement." She smiled. "They don't know there's been a slight change in the agenda. The last decade had been a careful chess game. While Marcus and his banking elite mocked my small investments, I've been quietly building an empire through Griffin Capital. Shell companies, silent partnerships, strategic acquisitions, all leading to this moment. The struggling companies I helped rebuild now formed a network of loyal allies, and their combined resources had allowed me to execute the ultimate takeover." "Does anyone suspect?" I asked as we rode to the top floor. "No, the share acquisitions were completely compartmentalized. Each shell company appeared independent. Even our insider sources say Marcus is confident about today's meeting. He's planning to announce Monarch's takeover of Rivera Banking Group." I smiled. Rivera Banking Group, another company I secretly controlled. The boardroom was impressive. All mahogany and marble, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Marcus stood at the head of the table, that same smug smile from last night plastered on his face. "James, what are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting." Actually, Sarah stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. "Mr. Griffin has every right to be here." "What is this?" Marcus grabbed the papers, his face reddening as he read. Ownership documents, I said calmly, taking a seat. As of 8 a.m. this morning, Griffin Capital holds 51% of Monarch Bank's shares. The room erupted in chaos. Board members grabbed copies of the documents, whispering frantically. Marcus's face had gone from red to white. Impossible. We would have known if someone was buying up shares. Would you? I pulled up a presentation on the boardroom screen. A web of companies and acquisitions, all leading back to Griffin Capital. You were too busy looking down on small businesses to notice them uniting under one banner. My banner. This is a trick, Marcus sputtered. The Williams family has controlled this bank for generations. Until you started making risky investments and alienating smaller clients, I countered. Did you think those clients had nowhere else to go? They came to me, Marcus. All those small dreams you mocked. They added up. The board members were nodding now, seeing the full picture. Marcus had been bleeding the bank with his aggressive expansion plans, while I'd been building a sustainable network of loyal customers and solid investments. You can't do this, he whispered. Rebecca. She's your sister. Yes, she is. And maybe now she'll remember what that means. I stood up, straightening my off-the-rack suit. By the way, your Rivera Banking Group takeover announcement? That won't be necessary. They already answer to me. The boardroom doors opened and Rebecca burst in, her face streaked with tears. Marcus, what's happening? Why is our account frozen? About that, I turned to my sister. We need to discuss some irregularities in Marcus's personal trading accounts. Significant irregularities. Marcus collapsed into his chair, his Italian suit suddenly looking like the costume it always was. All those years, he breathed. You were playing us. No, Marcus. I was just doing business, real business, something you never understood. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of audits, meetings, and revelations. What started as a takeover quickly turned into a scandal as our forensic accountants uncovered years of Marcus's financial misconduct. Unauthorized trades, inflated assets, and personal expenses disguised as business costs. The prestigious Williams banking dynasty was built on a foundation of sand. I sat in my new office, formerly Marcus's, reviewing the latest audit reports when Rebecca stormed in. How could you do this to us? She demanded, slamming her hands on my desk. Do you know what people are saying? Our friends won't even take my calls. Your friends? I looked up at my sister. Or your husband's friends? What's the difference? Marcus gave me everything. A perfect life, status, respect. Respect? I stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Let me show you something. I pulled up security footage from last month's board meeting. Watch how your husband treated his employees, the ones who weren't important enough. Rebecca's face fell as she watched Marcus berating a junior analyst, mocking an elderly board member, dismissing valid concerns about predatory lending practices. This was your perfect life? I asked softly, standing silently while he bullied people, just like you stood silently at that dinner when he humiliated me. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. After he helped pay for Mom's medical bills. I pay for those bills, I interrupted. Through one of my shell companies, Marcus just took the credit. Check your records. Rebecca sank into a chair, her designer handbag sliding to the floor. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? The brother with small dreams. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Griffin? The FBI agents are here about Mr. Williams's trading violations. Rebecca's head snapped up. FBI. James, please. He's still my husband. And you're still my sister. I sat beside her. That's why I've arranged for immunity in exchange for his cooperation. He'll face penalties and fines, but no jail time. The Williams family legacy might be over, but you won't have to see your husband in handcuffs. Why? She asked, tears streaming down her face. Why show mercy after everything he did? I handed her a framed photo I kept in my desk, us as kids, her standing up to bullies who were picking on her nerdy big brother. Because a long time ago, someone taught me that real strength isn't about having power. It's about how you use it. As Rebecca broke down crying, my phone buzzed with a message from the board. Marcus had agreed to resign. His last act would be to sign over his remaining shares. The Williams banking dynasty was officially over, but maybe, just maybe, the Griffin siblings could start healing. 1 year later, the sign on the building read Griffin and Partners Financial Group. a merger of Monarch Bank with my other companies. The marble and mahogany remained, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Junior employees no longer flinched when executives walked by, and the boardroom hosted regular meetings with small business owners and community leaders. I was reviewing a microlending proposal when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Marcus. He looked different, humbler in his department store suit, the arrogance gone from his stance. The immunity deal had saved him from prison, but his reputation in banking was finished. Most of his so-called friends had abandoned him the moment his empire crumbled. James, he nodded, standing awkwardly by the door. I came to sign the final paperwork. The divorce settlement. Rebecca told me, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. She said you're moving to Chicago. Small consulting firm. Very small. He attempted a weak smile. Ironic, right? All those dreams I mocked. Turns out they weren't so small after all. No, they weren't. He placed a folder on my desk, the last of his Monarch Bank shares being transferred as part of the divorce settlement. You know what the worst part is? He said quietly, not losing the money or the status. It's realizing that I had a chance to be part of something meaningful. Your vision for ethical banking, community development. I could have been your ally instead of your enemy. Yes, you could have. Rebecca's happier now, he admitted. I see it when we meet with the lawyers. She's found her voice again. Started that children's charity she always talked about. The one you said was a waste of time. He winced. I deserve that. And a lot more. He stood up, straightening his modest tie. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the dinner or the loans, but for everything. You were the better man, James. You always were. After he left, I walked through the office floors, watching my employees. Our employees, at work. The analyst Marcus had berated was now heading our community outreach program. The elderly board members' concerns about ethical banking had become our core philosophy. Rebecca's charity occupied the entire 10th floor, providing support for underprivileged children. My sister had found her purpose again, separate from designer labels and social climbing. Sometimes during lunch, we'd sit in my office and laugh about old times, slowly rebuilding the bond we'd lost. That evening, as I prepared for a board meeting, my assistant brought in a loan application. Small bakery downtown. Owner says she met you 10 years ago. I smiled, recognizing the name. It was the same woman who'd given me free coffee when I was struggling to build Griffin Capital, believing in my small dreams when everyone else scoffed. On the application, I wrote, approved, with compliments from the small dream believer. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about proving them wrong by creating something they never thought possible. Marcus had been right about one thing. Business was about power. But he never understood that the greatest power lies not in what you can take from others, but in what you can help them build. The first thing I noticed when I walked into my daughter Emily's room was the silence. No music playing, no typing at her desk, none of the usual sounds of a busy 17-year-old preparing college applications. Just silence and the sight of my daughter curled up on her bed, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Emily? I said softly, my heart dropping. What happened? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, clutching a letter in her trembling hands. They rejected me, she managed between sobs. Stanford said. They said they had to rescind my early acceptance due to academic dishonesty. My blood ran cold. Academic dishonesty? Emily? The girl who had spent the last 4 years maintaining a perfect GPA while juggling varsity swimming, student government, and countless volunteer hours. That's impossible, I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. There must be some mistake. Emily handed me the letter, her hands shaking. Someone reported that I cheated on my AP chemistry finals. They said they had proof. As I scanned the formal language of the rejection letter, my mind was already racing. Emily had been dreaming of Stanford since she was 12. Her room was decorated in cardinal red and white, Stanford pennants hanging on every wall. She had earned this, really earned it, and now someone was trying to take it away from her. Who would do this? I wondered aloud, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew. The slight smile I'd seen on Grace's face at breakfast this morning suddenly made horrible sense. Grace, my stepdaughter, the girl who had made it her mission to compete with Emily ever since her father and I married 3 years ago. My name is Catherine Mitchell, And at that moment, watching my daughter's dreams crumble because of what I strongly suspected was her stepsister's jealousy, I felt something inside me shift. The careful peace I maintained in our blended family, always trying to keep everyone happy, suddenly seemed less important than justice. Mom? Emily's voice was small, younger somehow. What am I going to do? It was everything. I pulled her close, letting her cry into my shoulder while my mind worked furiously. We're going to fight this, I said firmly. Whatever it takes. What Emily didn't know, what no one in our family really knew, was that before I became Catherine Mitchell, devoted wife and mother, I had been Catherine Reynolds, investigative journalist. I had spent 15 years uncovering truths that people tried to hide, following paper trails and exposing lies. I had stepped away from that life when I married David, choosing instead to focus on our blended family. But those skills, they never really go away. I need you to tell me exactly what happened, I said, pulling back to look at Emily. Every detail. Through her tears, Emily explained. The accusation claimed she had cheated on her AP chemistry final last semester, the same class where she had finally pulled ahead of Grace in rankings. Apparently, someone had provided the school with evidence that Emily had accessed test materials beforehand. But I didn't, she insisted, fresh tears spilling. I studied for weeks. I did. I did know. I had watched her spend countless nights at her desk, chemical equations spread around her like a complicated puzzle. Emily had earned her A+ honestly, the same A+ that had pushed her class ranking just above Grace's. Grace got her Stanford rejection last week, Emily said quietly, realization dawning in her eyes. She was so angry. Don't worry about Grace right now, I said, though internally my suspicions were hardening into certainty. Just tell me everything you remember about the test day. As Emily recounted the details, I made mental notes. The testing room setup, the seating arrangement, the proctor's position. Every detail could be important. What Grace didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she hadn't just messed with my daughter's future. She had awakened something I had kept dormant for years. The relentless pursuit of truth that had once been my life's work. I waited until Emily had cried herself to sleep before making my first move. In my home office, I pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in years. The reporter's instincts kicked in as I began mapping out what I knew and what I needed to find out. First step, the evidence itself. What exactly had been provided to the school? And more importantly, how had it been obtained? I opened my laptop and typed out a carefully worded email to Stanford's admissions office, requesting copies of all materials related to the academic dishonesty claim. Then I sent another to Emily's high school principal, scheduling an urgent meeting. As I worked, I heard footsteps in the hallway, Grace's distinctive gait. She paused briefly near my office door, probably wondering why the light was still on at midnight. I kept typing, giving no indication that I had noticed her presence. Let her think she had won. Let her believe that her perfect plan had worked. Because what Grace didn't understand was that she had just made a crucial mistake. She had hurt my daughter, yes, but more than that, she had left a trail. And following trails, that was what I did best. The next morning, I maintained my normal routine, made breakfast, packed lunches, smiled at David and Grace as they left for their days. But as soon as they were gone, I began my real work. First stop, Emily's high school. Principal Martinez was waiting for me, looking uncomfortable as I took a seat across from his desk. Mrs. Mitchell, he began. I understand you're upset, but the evidence. Show me, I interrupted calmly. Show me exactly what evidence was presented to Stanford. He hesitated, then pulled out a file. Inside were screenshots of what appeared to be text messages between Emily and another student discussing test answers. There were also photographs of what looked like test materials on Emily's desk before the exam. I studied them carefully, my old training kicking in. These are very convenient, I said finally. Almost too convenient. Tell me, did anyone verify the authenticity of these messages? Check the metadata on the photos. Principal Martinez shifted in his seat. Well, given the serious nature of the accusation. I'll take that as a no. I closed the file. I'd like copies of everything, please, and I'll need the name of the student who provided these. I can't reveal that information. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You can, and you will. Because if you don't, the next person sitting in this chair will be my lawyer, asking why the school acted on unverified evidence without due process. 20 minutes later, I walked out with everything I needed, including the confirmation that Grace had been the one to report Emily. Phase 1 complete. Now for the real work to begin. The more I dug into Grace's evidence, the more threads began to unravel. Sitting at my desk late that night, surrounded by printouts and digital forensics reports, I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. The kind I used to get when a big story was coming together. The text messages Grace had submitted, they were fake, good fakes, but fake nonetheless. My old contact in digital forensics had confirmed it. The metadata didn't match up, and the timestamps had been manipulated. The photos of test materials on Emily's desk, taken weeks after the actual exam, carefully staged to look incriminating. Grace had been thorough, I give her that. But she hadn't counted on going up against someone who had spent years exposing frauds far more sophisticated than this. My phone buzzed, a text from David. Working late again. Don't wait up. I smiled grimly. My husband had no idea what his daughter had done, or what I was doing to fix it. He saw Grace as his perfect little girl, incapable of such calculated cruelty, just like he didn't really know about my past life as an investigative journalist. Our marriage had been built on fresh starts, on leaving the past behind. But some things couldn't be left behind. Mom? Emily appeared in my doorway, looking small in her oversized Stanford sweatshirt. What are you doing up so late? I quickly minimized the screens on my laptop. Just some work, honey. How are you holding up? She shrugged, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I submitted applications to other schools, safety schools. She practically whispered the last part, like it physically hurt to say it. Emily, I said carefully, I need you to trust me. This isn't over. She looked at me skeptically. Mom, Stanford already made their decision. Grace won. Did she? I pulled out a folder. Come here. I want to show you something. I laid out the evidence of Grace's deception. The forensics report, the timeline inconsistencies, everything I had gathered over the past week. Emily's eyes widened as she took it all in. She really did this? Her voice trembled. But why? Why would she go to all this trouble? Because she couldn't beat you fairly, I said simply, and she underestimated who she was dealing with. Emily looked up at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing something new. Mom, how did you figure all this out? I took a deep breath. It was time for some truth. Before I married your stepdad, before I became just Mom, I was an investigative journalist. I specialized in exposing frauds and cover-ups. I smiled at her shocked expression. Let's just say Grace picked the wrong person to try to deceive. Just then, we heard the front door open, David and Grace returning from their late dinner. Emily quickly helped me gather the papers, understanding instinctively that this needed to stay between us for now. Trust me, I whispered as she headed back to her room. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The next morning, Grace was her usual sweet self at breakfast, playing the concerned stepsister perfectly. Emily, I heard back from UCLA yesterday. Their psychology program is really good too, you know. I watched Emily's hands clench under the table but admired her composure as she forced a smile. Thanks, Grace. I'll keep that in mind. David beamed at Grace. Always looking out for others, aren't you, sweetheart? I took a slow sip of coffee, remembering the latest piece of evidence I had uncovered last night. Grace's secret email account, the one she'd used to submit the false claims to Stanford. She'd been clever, using a VPN to hide her tracks, but not quite clever enough. After they left for school, I made my move. First stop, Stanford's Office of Academic Integrity. I had an appointment with the dean, and this time, I was armed with more than just maternal indignation. Dean Harrison was a stern-looking woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. She didn't look like someone easily swayed by emotion. Perfect. Mrs. Mitchell, she began, while I understand your distress. I cut her off by placing a thick folder on her desk. With respect, Dean Harrison, you don't understand anything yet, but you're about to. For the next hour, I laid out the evidence, the forensic analysis proving the text messages were fabricated, the metadata showing the photos were taken after the exam, the email trail linking everything back to Grace's secret account. This, I concluded, is not just about my daughter's college acceptance. This is about a deliberate attempt to destroy someone's academic future through fraudulent means. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Dean Harrison was silent for a long moment, reviewing the documents with growing concern. Finally, she looked up at me. This is quite comprehensive, Mrs. Mitchell. May I ask how you obtained all this? Let's just say I have experience in uncovering the truth. I met her gaze steadily. The question is, does Stanford have the integrity to admit they acted on false information? She nodded slowly. We'll need to verify everything independently, of course. But if this all checks out, she trailed off, then straightened in her chair. We may need to reconsider our decision regarding your daughter's admission. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Phase 2 was complete, but the hardest part was still to come. Because Grace, she still thought she had won. She had no idea that her carefully constructed plan was about to come crashing down around her. And I had decided that the revelation would happen in the most public way possible, at her high school graduation, where she was scheduled to give a speech as salutatorian. Right after Emily would speak as valedictorian. That is, if everything went according to my plan. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. I sat in the school auditorium between David and Grace's mother, Janet, who had flown in for the occasion. The proud parents watching their children graduate. If they only knew what was coming. Grace was practically glowing in her white graduation robe, chatting with friends near the stage. Emily sat quietly in her valedictorian's chair, her face composed but her hands fidgeting with the envelope containing her speech. What neither of them knew was that I had a third envelope tucked safely in my purse. Can you believe both our girls did so well? Janet whispered to me. Grace was so disappointed about Stanford, but she's handled it with such grace. UCLA will be lucky to have her. I smiled politely, thinking about the email I'd received from Stanford yesterday confirming everything was in place. Yes, they've both handled everything, exactly as expected. The ceremony began with the usual speeches, the principal, the school board president, various dignitaries. Finally, it was time for the student speeches. Emily stood first, walking to the podium with quiet confidence. Her voice was clear and strong as she began. When I was little, my mom taught me that truth always finds its way to the light, that no matter how deep someone tries to bury it, the truth has a way of surfacing when it matters most. My heart swelled with pride. We had worked on this speech together, carefully crafting each word. This year, I learned that lesson firsthand. I learned that sometimes people will try to take what's yours, will try to dim your light to make theirs shine brighter. But I also learned that if you stay true to yourself, if you keep working and believing in what's right, justice has a way of prevailing. I saw Grace shift uncomfortably in her seat. Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. So today, as we prepare to leave these halls and start our new journeys, I want to share something with all of you. Something that proves that truth and justice aren't just words and inspirational quotes. They're real and they matter. This was my cue. I stood up, drawing confused looks from David and Janet. 2 months ago, Emily said my acceptance to Stanford was rescinded because someone provided false evidence claiming I had cheated. Today, I'm honored to announce that not only has that decision been reversed, but Stanford has offered me a full academic scholarship. The auditorium erupted in applause. Grace's face had gone pale. But wait, Emily held up her hand. There's more to this story. Mom. I walked to the stage, my heels clicking against the wooden floor in the sudden silence. Principal Martinez, who had been briefed about what was coming, nodded slightly. Good morning, I said, taking the podium. My name is Catherine Mitchell, and before I was a mother, I was an investigative journalist specializing in exposing fraud. Today, I'm here to share some evidence that recently came to light. I opened my envelope and began laying out the truth, the fabricated texts, the staged photos, the secret email account. With each revelation, Grace sank lower in her seat. The person who orchestrated this campaign to destroy my daughter's future, I continued, my voice steady, is sitting on this stage right now. The audience gasped. David stood up, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. Grace, I said, turning to face my stepdaughter directly, would you like to explain why you did it? Grace looked wildly around like a cornered animal. I don't know what you're talking about. You can't prove. Actually, I interrupted, pulling out the final piece of evidence, a printout of emails from her secret account I can. And I did. What followed was chaos. Grace burst into tears. David demanded explanations. Janet looked like she might faint. But through it all, Emily stood tall, finally vindicated. Principal Martinez took the microphone, his voice cutting through the uproar. In light of this evidence, which has been thoroughly verified, the school board has made some adjustments to today's proceedings. Grace Mitchell, please step down from the stage. Your diploma will be held pending a review of your academic record. As Grace fled the stage, I returned to my seat. David turned to me, his face a mix of anger and betrayal. Why did he tell me? Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. Or would you have defended her, like you always do? He had no answer for that. The ceremony continued, though in a somewhat subdued fashion. Emily gave the rest of her speech, speaking about integrity and second chances. She was gracious, never mentioning Grace by name again. Afterward, as we stood in the parking lot taking pictures, Stanford's formal reinstatement letter safely tucked in Emily's graduation cap, David approached me. I don't know what to say, he began. I had no idea Grace could do something like this. I know, I said simply. That's part of the problem. He nodded slowly. What happens now? Now we deal with the consequences. All of us. I looked at him steadily. Grace needs help, David. Real help. Not excuses or protection. Later that night, as Emily and I sat in our backyard looking at the stars, she asked me the question I'd been expecting. Mom, did you have to do it so publicly? Expose Grace like that? I thought carefully before answering. Sometimes, sweetheart, justice needs witnesses. What Grace did wasn't just about hurting you. It was about making everyone believe a lie. The truth needed the same audience. She nodded, understanding. Will things ever be the same with David? No, I said honestly. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes relationships need to be rebuilt on truth instead of comfortable lies. 3 months later, Emily moved into her dorm at Stanford. Her room was exactly as she dreamed it would be, decorated in cardinal red and white. Grace had started therapy, finally confronting the jealousy and insecurity that had driven her actions. David and I were in counseling, working to rebuild our marriage on a foundation of honesty. As for me, I discovered that my old investigative skills hadn't faded. They'd just been waiting for the right moment to resurface. I'd started taking on some freelance work, exposing truths that needed to be told. Sometimes the biggest stories aren't about international conspiracies or corporate fraud. Sometimes they're about the quiet battles fought in suburban homes where truth and justice matter just as much as they do anywhere else. And sometimes the most important investigations are the ones that protect not just the truth, but the people we love most. Hi, I'm Jessica Chen, and this is the story of how my mother's cruelest words became the foundation of my success. They say the best revenge is living well, but sometimes living well means watching your tormentors realize exactly what they threw away. I can still hear her voice on that rainy November night, sharp as broken glass. You're worthless, just like your father. Get out of my house. I was 18, fresh out of high school, clutching an acceptance letter to a local community college. My crime? Choosing to study computer science instead of following my mother's dream of me becoming a doctor. Linda Chen, my mother, had always been obsessed with status. After divorcing my father when I was 12, she'd rebuilt her image as a successful real estate agent in our affluent suburban community. Our house was a showcase of her success, all gleaming hardwood and crystal chandeliers. But beneath that perfect surface lay a woman who measured everything and everyone by their potential to elevate her social status. Computer science? She'd sneered, reading my college plans. Do you want to fix printers for minimum wage your whole life? No daughter of mine will embarrass me like this. I tried explaining about artificial intelligence, software development, the growing tech industry, but Mom was already typing on her phone, barely listening. I've already told everyone you're pre-med. The Wine's daughter is starting at Johns Hopkins this fall. How am I supposed to hold my head up at the country club now? That's when I made my fatal mistake. Maybe if you spent less time at the country club and more time understanding what I want. The slap caught me off guard, sending my glasses flying. In the ringing silence that followed, Mom's perfectly manicured hand shook with rage. You ungrateful little snake, she hissed. I gave up everything to give you the best life. Your loser father hasn't paid child support in years. But I made sure you had designer clothes, piano lessons, everything. And this is how you repay me." She stormed upstairs, and for a moment I thought that was the end of it, just another of her dramatic outbursts. Then she returned with a garbage bag full of my clothes, throwing it at my feet. "Get out. Go live with your worthless father if you want to throw your life away. I won't watch you become a failure." "Mom, please." I said outed. She grabbed my arm, nails digging in, and practically dragged me to the door. "Don't come crawling back when you're living in some filthy apartment fixing computers for minimum wage." The door slammed behind me, leaving me alone in the rain. I was 18, had $342 in my savings account, and nowhere to go. My father lived 3 states away, struggling to keep his small computer repair shop afloat. I hadn't seen him in person since the divorce. That night, sitting in a 24-hour diner with my garbage bag of belongings, I made 2 calls. The first was to my father. "Come stay with me, Jesse," he said immediately, his voice warm despite the static on the line. "It's not much, but we'll figure something out." The second call was to decline my community college acceptance. If I was going to prove my mother wrong, I needed to think bigger. The next few years were a blur of work and study. I moved in with Dad above his repair shop, taking online courses while helping him modernize his business. His shop, Chen's Computer Repair, became my crash course in both technology and business management. "Your mother always said I was dreaming too small," Dad told me one night as we worked late upgrading a client's servers. Maybe I was, but sometimes small dreams are the seeds of bigger ones. He was right. While helping local businesses with their needs, I noticed a common problem. Small companies needed enterprise-level cybersecurity, but couldn't afford the expensive solutions big corporations used. That observation became the seed of everything that followed. I spent my nights coding, developing a simplified but robust security suite specifically for small businesses. Dad let me test early versions on his clients, their feedback helping me refine the software. When I wasn't coding or helping in the shop, I was teaching myself about business planning, marketing, and startup funding. 3 years after being thrown out, I launched Secure Small, my cybersecurity startup. The timing was perfect. A wave of ransomware attacks had just targeted small businesses across the country, and our affordable solution quickly gained traction. Dad was my first investor, remortgaging his shop to give me seed money. "I believe in you, Jesse," he said, signing the papers. "Show them what a worthless person can do." The next few years were a rocket ride. Secure Small expanded from cybersecurity into other small business solutions. We opened offices in 3 cities. I hired the best developers I could find, many of them overlooked talents from non-traditional backgrounds. By my 28th birthday, Secure Small was valued at $80 million, and I was being featured in technology magazines as a rising star in the industry. I never Googled my mother during those years, though I knew she still lived in the same house, still sold real estate to the same wealthy clients. Sometimes I imagined her at her country club, lying about her successful doctor-daughter living abroad. I wondered if anyone ever questioned why there were no pictures, no visits, no proof of this fictional successful child. Then came the day everything changed. I was in my corner office, reviewing acquisition offers from larger tech companies, when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Chen, there's a Linda Chen here to see you. She claims she's your mother." I felt the old familiar tightness in my chest, but this time it was different. This time, I was different. "Send her in," I said. The woman who walked through my door looked smaller than I remembered. Her designer suit was a few seasons old, her smile strained, but her voice still carried that familiar mix of authority and disdain. "Jessica, darling, I've been trying to reach you." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. "Finally," I said. "Really? The last words you spoke to me were that I was worthless. That was 10 years ago." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, sweetheart, you know I didn't mean that. I was just worried about your future. And look at you now, so successful. I always knew you had it in you." "Why are you here, Mom?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Well, as your mother, I thought it was time we reconnected. And actually, I'm between positions right now. The real estate market isn't what it used to be. I thought perhaps, given your company's success, you might have a place for me. Something in client relations, maybe? You know how good I am with people." I looked at the woman who had thrown me out with nothing, who had called me worthless, who had chosen her social status over her own daughter. And I smiled. Actually, Mom, we do have an opening. Why don't you come back tomorrow morning? 8 a.m. sharp. We'll see exactly what you're worth to this company. She beamed, completely missing the edge in my voice. Oh, wonderful. I knew you wouldn't let your mother down. The Wams will be so impressed when I tell them. No announcements yet. I cut in smoothly. Let's see how tomorrow goes first. After she left, I made several calls. Tomorrow would indeed show everyone exactly what people were worth, and it would be a lesson my mother would never forget. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. Everything had to be perfect for what I had planned. My mother arrived at 7:58, wearing her most expensive suit, her smile bright with anticipation. Jessica, darling, I brought coffee for my successful daughter. She held up a cup from an expensive cafe, the kind she used to say I'd never be able to afford. Follow me, Mom, I said, leading her not to my office but to the main conference room. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw it was full of people, our entire management team, several board members, and in the center, my father. John, what are you doing here? She nearly dropped her coffee. Dad just smiled, the same gentle smile he'd worn when he remortgaged his shop to fund my dreams. Please, take a seat, Mom. I gestured to the only empty chair, positioned directly under the main screen. You wanted to see what position you might be worth in this company. Let's discuss that. I moved to the front of the room, clicking to the first slide. It showed a garbage bag full of clothes on a rainy doorstep. 10 years ago, Linda Chen threw her 18-year-old daughter out of the house for choosing to study computer science instead of medicine. She called that daughter worthless. I clicked to the next slide, security footage from that night at the diner. That daughter had $342 to her name. Mom's face had gone pale. Jessica, this is hardly appropriate for a business meeting. Oh, but it is, I continued smoothly, because Secure Small's core values are built on recognizing worth in unexpected places. We hire talented developers who taught themselves coding in libraries because they couldn't afford college. We create solutions for small businesses that bigger companies deemed worthless. Everything we do is about seeing the value others miss. I clicked through more slides. Dad's shop, early versions of our software, our first tiny office. When we evaluate potential employees, we look at 3 things: their skills, their character, and their judgment of worth. So let's evaluate Linda Chen. I turned to face her directly. Skills first. You were a successful real estate agent, specializing in luxury properties. But according to public records, you haven't closed a sale in 8 months. Your license is currently suspended pending investigation of misrepresented property values. Mom's face flushed red. That was a simple misunderstanding. Character next, I continued as if she hadn't spoken. You abandoned your ex-husband when his business struggled, then prevented him from seeing his daughter. You threw that daughter out for not conforming to your image of success. And now that you're facing financial difficulties, you've come to the daughter you called worthless, expecting a job. The room was dead silent. Even the usual traffic sounds from outside seemed muted. Finally, judgment of worth. 10 years ago, you looked at a bright, ambitious 18-year-old and saw nothing of value because she didn't fit your narrow definition of success. You looked at a hardworking small business owner and saw a loser. Your judgment of worth has consistently been not just poor, but actively harmful. I clicked to the final slide, a comparison of 2 numbers. This is interesting, Mom. The first number is the current value of your suspended real estate license and frozen assets, approximately $42,000. The second is Secure Small's latest valuation, $80 million. Quite a gap between your judgment of worth and reality. Mom stood up, her hands shaking. I get it, Jessica. You've made your point. You're successful, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. Now can we discuss my position here like adults? I smiled. Oh, we are discussing your position. In fact, I do have a job for you. Her eyes lit up with hope. We're launching a new initiative to provide a training in cybersecurity solutions to small computer repair shops. Dad's shop was our prototype location. We're expanding to 500 shops nationwide this year. I handed her a folder. Inside you'll find a job offer. Entry-level technical support. 6-month probationary period. Starting salary matches our standard entry-level package. You'll work at Dad's shop, learning the basics of the industry you once dismissed. If you complete the training successfully, you'll have the opportunity to advance based solely on your merit, not your connections, not your status, not your relation to me. She stared at the folder like it might bite her. Technical support at John's shop. But I'm your mother. No, Mom. 10 years ago, you made it very clear I wasn't your daughter anymore because I was worthless. You can't take that back just because my worth now comes with dollar signs attached. I turned to the room, meeting adjourned, everyone. Thank you for your time. As people filed out, Mom remained frozen in her chair, clutching the folder. The choice is yours, I said quietly. You can take the job, learn the industry from the ground up, and maybe eventually understand what real worth looks like. Or you can walk away. Either way, this is the only offer you'll ever get from me. Dad waited by the door as Mom slowly stood up, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. I need time to think, she whispered. Take 24 hours, I replied, just like you gave me 10 years ago. After she left, Dad wrapped me in a hug. You okay, Jessie? I nodded against his shoulder. You know what's funny, Dad? Part of me hoped she'd take one look at that entry-level offer and storm out in outrage. It would prove she hadn't changed at all. And now I almost hope she takes it, not for her sake, but because maybe, just maybe, she'll learn what we learned. That worth isn't about status or appearances. It's about what you build, what you contribute, how you treat people. The next morning, I arrived at work to find Mom waiting in reception, wearing a simple blouse instead of her designer suit. I'll take the job, she said quietly. I nodded. Report to Dad's shop tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late. As I watched her leave, I thought about worth. How we measure it, how we create it, how we recognize it in others. My mother had thrown away a daughter in search of status. She'd lost everything chasing an image of success. Now she had a chance to learn what real success looked like, from the ground up. Would she learn? Only time would tell. But I had already learned the most valuable lesson. Sometimes being called worthless is just the beginning of proving your true worth. Today, Secura Small continues to grow. We've helped thousands of small businesses protect themselves in the digital age. Mom, she's still working at Dad's shop, slowly learning the industry she once dismissed. Sometimes, when I visit the shop, I catch her watching me with a mixture of pride and regret. Last week, she successfully completed her first solo computer repair. Dad sent me a photo of her proud smile, so different from her old country club smirk. Maybe she's finally learning that real worth isn't in what you appear to be, but in what you actually do. As for me, I keep that old garbage bag in my office closet. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder that being called worthless doesn't make it true. Sometimes it just means others failed to see your worth. And proving them wrong, that's the sweetest success of all. Hi, I'm Sarah Chin, and this is the story of how I learned that appearances can be the perfect disguise for success. For 3 years, I cleaned offices at Chen Technologies while secretly owning 51% of the company's shares. But let me start from the beginning. I met James Chen at a coffee shop 5 years ago. He was struggling with his startup, working endless hours trying to keep his small tech company afloat. I was immediately drawn to his passion and determination, even though his company was barely breaking even. What he didn't know was that I had just sold my first software company for $40 million and was looking for my next investment opportunity. I kept my success quiet. Too many experiences with people only interested in my money had taught me to be cautious. So when James and I started dating, I told him I worked in business operations, which wasn't exactly a lie. He assumed I was a mid-level manager somewhere, and I let him believe that. Our relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, we were married in a simple ceremony. His family, especially his mother, Linda Chen, was less than thrilled. A manager marrying into the Chen family? She'd whisper loud enough for me to hear. James could have done so much better. But then came the twist that would set everything in motion. 2 months after our wedding, James's company, Chen Technologies, was on the verge of collapse. They needed an immediate injection of $10 million to survive. James was devastated. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I would help, but on my terms. I created a shell company, Phoenix Investments, and approached Chen Technologies as an interested investor. The deal was simple, $10 million for 51% of the company. James was hesitant to lose control, but with no other options he agreed. What he didn't know was that his new majority shareholder was actually his wife. Here's where things got interesting. To keep an eye on my investment while maintaining my cover, I took a job as the office cleaner at Chen Technologies. James was embarrassed, his wife working as a cleaner at his company, but I insisted, saying we needed the extra money. Linda, my mother-in-law, was ecstatic. Finally, she had concrete proof of my low status. She made sure everyone knew that her son had married the cleaner. At family dinners, she'd deliberately spill things. "Oh, Sarah, be a dear and clean that up. It's what you're good at, after all." For 3 years, I played my part perfectly. I cleaned offices during the day, but my real work happened after hours. Through Phoenix Investments, I quietly guided the company's major decisions, turning down James' riskier proposals and steering the company toward more profitable ventures. The company began to stabilize, then thrive. But success made James's family even more unbearable. They credited everything to James' natural business genius, while treating me with increasing disdain. Linda even started a campaign to convince James to divorce me. "A cleaner isn't suitable for a CEO," she'd say. "Think of your reputation." James, to his credit, defended me, but I could see the strain it was putting on him. The final straw came last week when Linda organized a surprise dinner. She invited a young, wealthy heiress who she thought would be perfect for James. The entire evening was orchestrated to humiliate me. As I served coffee, Linda had insisted I act as waitstaff. I overheard her telling the heiress, "Don't worry about her. Once James signs the new company restructuring plan tomorrow, we'll have enough leverage to force her out." Little did they know, tomorrow would change everything. Because tomorrow was the day Phoenix Investments would finally reveal its true owner, and I had my own surprise plan for the Chen family. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I arrived at Chen Technologies early, not to clean, but to prepare for what would become the most memorable board meeting in the company's history. I changed from my usual cleaner's uniform into a tailored black Armani suit I kept hidden in my office. Yes, I had an office. The cleaning staff supervisor's office, to be exact, which I'd used for late-night work when everyone else had gone home. Linda had orchestrated this emergency board meeting, convinced she finally outmaneuvered the mysterious Phoenix Investments. She'd spent months gathering support from minor shareholders, promising them better returns once they removed the absent investor who was holding the company back. She didn't realize that every move she'd made had been carefully monitored. James arrived looking troubled. He'd mentioned the meeting to me the night before, apologizing that I couldn't attend since it was high-level business stuff. I just smiled and told him I'd be busy cleaning the conference room anyway. He'd winced at that, and I'd seen the doubt in his eyes, the same doubt his mother had been carefully nurturing. The board members filed in at 9 a.m. sharp. Linda swept in last, wearing a triumphant smile, followed by her personal lawyer. She'd even invited several business reporters, planning to make the leadership transition a public spectacle. I watched through the conference room's glass walls as she took her seat beside James, patting his hand like a mother about to watch her child win a school prize. "Before we begin," Linda announced, standing up, "I want to thank everyone for coming to this historic meeting. Today we'll be voting on a new direction for Chen Technologies, one that will finally unleash its true potential." She shot a meaningful look at the reporters. That was my cue. I walked into the conference room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The security guard, who usually gave me friendly nods, now stood straighter, uncertain why the cleaner was wearing an Armani suit. "What is she doing here?" Linda demanded, her voice shrill. "Security." "Actually," I said calmly, placing my briefcase on the table, "I have every right to be here." I pulled out a folder and slid it across to the company secretary. "As the majority shareholder, I believe I should have a say in this new direction." The room erupted in confused murmurs. James stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. Linda laughed, but it sounded forced. "What nonsense is this? Everyone knows Phoenix Investments holds the majority shares, not some cleaner." I smiled and opened my laptop, connecting it to the room's main screen. "Let me clarify something. My name is Sarah Chen, formerly Sarah Zhang, founder of Zhang Security Systems, which I sold for $40 million 5 years ago. I am also the owner and CEO of Phoenix Investments." I pulled up the company registration documents, watching as the color drained from Linda's face. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" I turned to the business reporters she'd invited. Would anyone like to fact-check that? Zhang's security system sale was quite well documented. One of the reporters was already frantically typing on his phone. His eyes widened. She's telling the truth. Sarah Zhang was named one of the top under 30 entrepreneurs 3 years ago. But she disappeared from the public eye after selling her company. Because I fell in love, I said simply, looking at James. His face had gone pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. I wanted someone to love me for me, not my money or success. When I met James, I found that. And when his company needed help, I found a way to provide it while letting him maintain his dignity. Linda had sunk back into her chair, her triumphant smile long gone. But I wasn't finished. I clicked to the next slide, displaying a comprehensive analysis of every attempt she'd made to undermine the company's relationship with Phoenix Investments. Mrs. Chen, you've spent the last year trying to convince shareholders that Phoenix Investments was hurting this company. Let's look at the actual numbers. I walked them through charts showing the company's growth since my investment. Under my guidance, Chen Technologies has tripled its market share and increased profits by 400%. I turned to the board members. The restructuring plan you were brought here to vote on would have stripped Phoenix Investments, stripped me, of my voting rights through a complex shell game of subsidiary corporations. Did anyone bother to ask why a majority shareholder who'd helped deliver such strong returns needed to be removed? The board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Linda's desperate glances. The reporters were typing frantically on their phones. This was definitely not the story they'd expected to cover today. Sarah, James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Why didn't you tell me? I moved to stand beside him, placing my hand on his shoulder. Because you needed to become the leader I knew you could be without living in my shadow. Every decision you made, every success you achieved, was your own. I just helped guide the company away from the riskier ventures. All those nights you came home late from cleaning, he said, realization dawning in his eyes. I was working in my office, reviewing contracts and financial reports. I squeezed his shoulder. The cleaning job was just my cover. Though I have to say, you'd be amazed at what people will discuss in front of the cleaning staff. Linda suddenly stood up, swaying slightly. This is all a lie. Some trick. You're just a cleaner. A nobody. You can't be. Oh, but I am. I cut her off firmly. And now that everything's in the open, we need to discuss your attempts to seize control of this company. The board members might be interested to know about the offshore accounts you've been promising them. I pulled up another document on the screen. Linda's eyes rolled back, and she crumpled to the floor in a dead faint. As people rushed to help her, I caught James's eye. He was still processing everything, but I saw the beginning of a smile tugging at his lips. You really cleaned up this situation, didn't you? He whispered, and I knew we would be okay. But the day wasn't over yet. As Linda was helped into a chair, coming around, I prepared to reveal the final phase of my plan. One that would secure the company's future and put an end to the power plays once and for all. In the chaos that followed Linda's fainting spell, I maintained my composure and continued the meeting. After all, I hadn't spent 3 years building this company to let one dramatic revelation derail our future. As Linda was helped back into her chair, still pale and shaking, I moved to the next phase of my presentation. Now that we've cleared up the matter of ownership, I said, clicking to a new slide, let's discuss Chen Technologies' future. I laid out my vision, a merger with my new startup, a quantum encryption company I'd been quietly developing on the side. The combined companies would be worth over $500 million. This is what you've been trying to prevent, Mrs. Chen, I said, addressing my mother-in-law directly. While you were busy planning my removal, I was negotiating one of the biggest deals in Silicon Valley's cybersecurity sector. The reporters were practically salivating. One had already published a breaking news tweet that was going viral. Cleaning lady revealed as secret tech millionaire CEO during hostile takeover attempt. James finally found his voice again. All those times you said you were at night school, learning business basics. I was meeting with investors and development teams. I smiled apologetically. I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed to keep this quiet until everything was in place. Linda, who had recovered enough to speak, tried one last time to regain control. The board won't approve this, she said weakly. They know better than to trust some what, mother? James cut in, standing up. Some woman who built a successful company from scratch. Some person who loved your son enough to help him succeed while staying in the background? Some CEO who just offered us a deal that will make Chen Technologies a major player in cybersecurity? The board members were already nodding enthusiastically, looking at the projected profit margins with growing excitement. The deal wasn't just good, it was transformative. I moved to approve the merger, one board member said quickly. Others seconded immediately. As the votes were counted, unanimously in favor, I watched the last of Linda's power crumble. She'd spent years building her influence in the company, positioning herself as the mother of the CEO, the wise advisor, the power behind the throne. Now she was just the woman who had spent 3 years mocking her daughter-in-law for being a cleaner. The meeting concluded with the signing of preliminary merger documents. As people filed out, buzzing with excitement about the company's future, James pulled me aside into his office. 3 years, he said softly. 3 years of watching my mother belittle you, of seeing you clean floors and empty trash cans. Why did you put yourself through that? I took his hand. Because I believed in you. In us. I wanted to help you succeed without making you feel less. I've seen too many relationships destroyed by money and power imbalances. He pulled me close. You know what amazes me most? Not that you're secretly wealthy or that you've been running the company from the shadows. It's that you were willing to clean toilets just to stay close to me and help the company succeed. Well, I smiled. It did give me an excellent view of how the company really operated. Your middle managers really should learn to watch what they say around the cleaning staff. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. The merger announcement sent our stock price soaring. Business magazines clamored for interviews, fascinated by the story of the undercover CEO. I agreed to a few carefully chosen ones that focused on the business strategy rather than the family drama. Linda took an extended vacation to recover from the shock. Before she left, I visited her at home. She sat stiffly in her living room, looking smaller somehow, diminished. I don't expect us to be friends, I told her honestly, but I love your son, and this company has been his dream since before I met him. I'd like to find a way forward that doesn't involve constant warfare. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You could have destroyed me today, exposed all my plans, my offshore accounts. Why didn't you? Because you're James's mother, I said simply, and because sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding. She nodded slowly, and while we didn't hug or suddenly become best friends, something shifted. A foundation for a different kind of relationship built on respect, if not affection. James and I moved forward too. He insisted on taking me to dinner at the coffee shop where we first met. As we sat in the same booth where I'd first fallen for his passionate talk about his struggling startup, he took my hand. You know what this means, right? He said with a grin. No more pretending. No more cleaning uniforms. I squeezed his hand. Actually, I think I'll keep doing the cleaning supervisor rounds once a week. You'd be amazed what people tell the cleaning lady. It's better than any management consultant's report. We laughed together, and I felt the last weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was finally out, and our future was brighter than ever. Today, 6 months later, Chen Technologies Zhang Security is the fastest-growing cybersecurity firm in Silicon Valley. James and I run it together, true partners at last. Linda has returned from her vacation with a slightly different attitude. She still isn't warm, but she's respectful, especially after our stock price tripled post-merger. And me? I keep a cleaning uniform hanging in my CEO office. It reminds me that success isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what you love, even if that means pushing a mop while running a company. Sometimes at night, I walk through our empty offices, remembering all the conversations I overheard, all the plans I made while everyone thought I was just emptying trash bins. And I smile, knowing that sometimes the best disguise isn't wealth or power, it's being underestimated. After all, they say it's lonely at the top. But from what I've seen, the view is much better from the bottom, looking up at people who never bother to look down. Because that's where you learn the truth about who people really are and what they're really capable of. And as for James, he still occasionally teases me about my night school classes, but now when he introduces me at business functions, he always adds with a proud smile, my wife. She really knows how to clean up in business. The day I was fired from Nova Tech wasn't the worst day of my life. That had come 6 months earlier when Mom's cancer returned. But standing in Marcus Sterling's corner office, watching him sneer at my request for flexible hours to handle her treatments, I realized just how cruel success could make people. Let me get this straight, David. Marcus leaned back in his Italian leather chair, his custom suit probably worth more than my yearly salary. You want special treatment because your mother is sick. Do you think Novatech became a billion-dollar company by accommodating everyone's personal problems? I stood my ground, 5 years of leading his R&D department giving me the courage to speak up. I've delivered every project ahead of schedule. I can work remotely when needed. My team supports. Your team? He cut me off with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Let's be clear. They're my team. Everything here is mine. That's what happens when you're the CEO. The Manhattan skyline stretched out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows, a perfect backdrop for his power play. On his desk, business magazines featured his face under headlines like Tech's youngest billionaire and the new king of Silicon Valley. I just need 3 months. I tried again. The doctors say this round of treatment is crucial, and I need employees who put this company first. Marcus stood, straightening his tie. Your mother's health issues are not Novatech's concern. If you can't maintain normal working hours, I'll find someone who can. The threat hung in the air between us. I thought about Mom, how she'd raised me alone after Dad died, working 2 jobs to put me through engineering school. How she'd never missed a science fair or graduation, even when she was exhausted. How she'd beamed with pride when I landed this job at Novatech. Then I guess you'll have to find someone else, I said quietly. Marcus's smile was sharp as a knife. Security will escort you out. Your personal items will be shipped to you. He turned to his computer, already dismissing me. Oh, and David, don't expect a reference. As security walked me through the open office, past shocked colleagues and whispered conversations, I caught a glimpse of the presentation slides on the main screen. Project Quantum, $2.3 billion merger with TechCorp Industries. Little did Marcus know, but that merger was about to become his biggest nightmare. Because while he'd been busy building his empire on the backs of overworked employees, I'd been quietly building something of my own. The idea had come during those long nights at the hospital during Mom's first bout with cancer. Watching the medical equipment struggle to communicate across different systems, seeing nurses waste precious time dealing with compatibility issues, I knew there had to be a better way. For 2 years, I'd worked on it in my spare time, a revolutionary quantum computing protocol that could seamlessly integrate any technological system, regardless of manufacturer or operating system. The ultimate universal translator for the digital age. Novatech's contracts included the standard clause claiming ownership of any innovation developed using company resources. But I hadn't used a single company resource. Every line of code had been written on my personal laptop, every test run through servers I built in my garage. And 3 months ago, just after Mom's cancer returned, I quietly filed the patents under my own name. The same patents that Novatech's merger with TechCorp desperately needed to succeed. Walking out of the Novatech building for the last time, I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Dr. Sarah Chen, Mom's oncologist, upgrading her care package to the hospital's premium suite. The second was to my old college roommate, now a partner at Silicon Valley's top tech law firm. Hey, Michael, I said, watching Marcus's office through the glass walls as he probably drafted the company-wide email about my departure. Remember that patent portfolio we filed? I think it's time to take it public. The next morning, as I sat with Mom during her treatment, my phone buzzed with breaking news alerts. Mysterious PTNT FIALING 3 teens NLVATCHCORPMEOGR. Wall Street QESTIONS VIABILITW of $2.3 billion test-stage deal. NOVATCHSTOCK PLUMANITIS on integration concerns. Mom looked up from her magazine, ever perceptive despite her illness. Something interesting on your phone, honey? I smiled, taking her hand. Just some business news, nothing as important as being here with you. But we both knew this was just the beginning. Marcus Sterling was about to learn a valuable lesson about what really matters in life. And it wasn't his corner office or magazine covers. Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the catalyst for something extraordinary. And sometimes, when you choose love over power, you end up with both. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hospital visits, patent meetings, and increasingly frantic news updates about Novatech's crumbling merger plans. From my mom's premium hospital suite, I watched Marcus Sterling's empire start to crack. TechCorp demands answers on integration protocol. Novatech faces shareholder revolt over merger concerns. Sterling's $2.3 billion dream deal on life support. You don't look very upset for someone who just lost their job, Mom observed one morning, her keen eyes studying me over her breakfast tray. Despite the aggressive treatments, she hadn't lost her sharp insight. Actually, I smiled, setting my laptop aside. I think I finally found my real job. My phone buzzed. Michael, my patent attorney, calling with updates. David, it's chaos over there, he reported gleefully. Sterling's been in emergency board meetings for 3 days straight. TechCorp is threatening to pull out unless Novatech can guarantee system integration within 6 months, which they can't do without my protocol. I finished. Exactly. Their in-house team says it would take years to develop something comparable. The board is demanding answers, shareholders are panicking, and Sterling, well, let's just say his tech's youngest billionaire crown is slipping. I glanced at Mom, dozing now after her morning medications. Have they figured out who owns the patents yet? No, but they're getting close. Sterling's lawyers have been crawling all over the patent office filings. It's only a matter of time. As if on cue, my phone lit up with another call. Nina Chen, my former deputy at Novatech's R&D department. David, she whispered urgently, Sterling's on the warpath. He just fired 3 people for disloyalty because they suggested looking for the patent holder instead of trying to build a new protocol from scratch. How's the team? Scared. Overworked. He's got everyone pulling 16-hour days trying to replicate your work. But David, she hesitated. There's something else. I overheard him on the phone with someone about alternative acquisition methods. He sounded desperate. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Marcus Sterling hadn't built his empire by playing nice. When billions were at stake, people like him often decided that rules were for others. Sure enough, that evening, unusual activity alerts started pinging from my home security system. Someone had tried to access my garage where my development servers were kept. They're getting sloppy, Michael commented when I called him. I've documented everything. But David, you need to be careful. Sterling's not going to take this lying down. He was right. The next morning, a routine audit from the IRS arrived at my door. By afternoon, old college acquaintances were receiving calls about my concerning behavior. A reporter even showed up at Mom's hospital room, asking questions about my troubled childhood. Classic intimidation tactics, Michael assured me. They're trying to pressure you into revealing yourself. The good news is it means they're desperate. The bad news arrived 3 days later. Mom's doctor called me into her office, looking troubled. There's been a complication with the insurance, Dr. Chen said carefully. Somehow, all your mother's premium care authorizations have been revoked. They're saying she needs to move to standard care immediately. My hands clenched. Sterling. I'm sorry. Nothing. I stood up. Don't change anything about her care. I'll handle the bills directly. But Marcus Sterling's message was clear. He could hurt me through the people I loved. Walking back to Mom's room, I made a decision. It was time to stop playing defense. I called Michael. Remember that press package we prepared? Release it tomorrow morning. All of it. The full reveal. Are you sure? Once we do this, I'm sure. And Michael? Make sure every major business news outlet gets the video of Sterling firing me. The security cameras had excellent audio. The next morning, while Mom and I watched the sunrise from her hospital window, my phone exploded with notifications. Fired Novatech gauge engineer reveled as nlistieroi pkent holodier. Steer lines fatal mistake. Full video of confrontation goes EIRAL. Novatech board KL's emergency meeting as SHR IS plunge 40%. Mom picked up her tablet, reading the headlines. Is this why you've been smiling at your phone all week? I took her hand. Part of it. The other part is your latest scan results. The treatment's working, Mom. Tears filled her eyes. You didn't have to give up your job for me. I didn't give up anything. I just finally understood what you always taught me. Real success isn't about corner offices or magazine covers. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. My phone buzzed again. A message from Nina. Sterling's called an all-hands emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's ordered every department head to attend, including former employees. David, I think this is it. I squeezed Mom's hand. Get some rest. I have a meeting tomorrow. Give them hell, honey, she smiled. But remember, revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about building something better. I finished our old saying. I know, Mom, and that's exactly what I plan to do. Novatech's lobby looked exactly as I remembered it. All chrome and glass and carefully cultivated power. But this morning, the usual buzz of activity was replaced by tense silence. Every screen displayed the same news. Novatech's stock in freefall. The merger collapsing, and my face. The fired engineer who held their future in his hands. Security recognized me immediately. Mr. Wilson, the guard nodded respectfully, all traces of his previous dismissive attitude gone. The board is waiting in the main conference room. I checked my watch, 8:57 a.m. Right on time. The conference room fell silent as I entered. Familiar faces lined both sides of the massive table. Department heads, board members, and major investors. Marcus Sterling sat at the head, his perfect facade cracking around the edges. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his designer suit slightly rumpled. David, he forced a smile. Thank you for coming. I believe we have some things to discuss. Do we? I took my seat, setting my laptop on the table. I thought Novatech wasn't concerned with personal problems. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. The video of my firing had gone viral, with Sterling's callous dismissal of my sick mother becoming a symbol of toxic corporate culture. The past is the past. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. We're here to talk business. Your integration protocol. Obviously, there's been a misunderstanding about ownership. No misunderstanding. I opened my laptop. The patents are registered to me personally. Every line of code was written on my own time, using my own resources. Your lawyers have already confirmed this. Then name your price. Sterling leaned forward. Everyone has one. I pulled up a document on the main screen. Actually, I have terms. Terms? Sterling's fake smile faltered. First, Novatech will establish a comprehensive healthcare fund for all employees and their families. Full coverage, no exceptions. That's not. Second, I continued, the company will implement strict work-life balance policies. No more 80-hour weeks or vacation shaming. This is ridiculous. Sterling stood up. We're offering you millions and you want to play social justice warrior? Third, I met his glare steadily. You resign as CEO effective immediately. The room erupted in chaos. Sterling's face turned purple. How dare you? How dare I? I stood up slowly. You tried to intimidate me. You targeted my mother's medical care. You even sent people to break into my home. You can't prove. Actually, I tapped my laptop, bringing up another screen. I can prove everything, including your insider trading last quarter, your offshore accounts, and those interesting emails about alternative acquisition methods. The board chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, perhaps we should discuss these allegations privately. This is absurd. Sterling slammed his fist on the table. I built this company. No, I corrected quietly. You built an empire on other people's work and sacrifice. The real Novatech was built by engineers working overtime, by developers missing their kids' birthdays, by people like me who believed in creating something meaningful. I turned to address the board directly. My integration protocol is revolutionary. With it, Novatech could dominate the tech industry for decades. Without it, the company will lose the merger and likely face a shareholder revolt. The chairman nodded gravely. Your terms, Mr. Wilson, are non-negotiable. I finished. But there's one more thing. I pulled up a final document, a press release announcing Novatech's new charitable initiative. The Grace Wilson Memorial Foundation, named for my mother, dedicated to supporting families facing medical crises. You're insane, Sterling whispered. The shareholders will never. Actually, a new voice spoke up. James Chen, our biggest investor, stood. The shareholders have already voted. Mr. Sterling, the board has lost confidence in your leadership. We accept Mr. Wilson's terms. What happened next was a blur of signatures and legal documents. By noon, Marcus Sterling had been escorted from the building, his empire crumbling around him. By evening, Novatech's stock had stabilized as the markets responded to the announced changes. 1 week later, I stood in Mom's hospital room, watching her read the news coverage. Novatech announces revolutionary new direction, she read aloud. Former R&D head David Wilson named CEO. My son, the chief executive. Acting CEO, I corrected. Just until we implement the changes. Then I'm going back to R&D, that's where the real work happens. She smiled knowingly. And the foundation. Already helping 3 families cover their cancer treatments. I took her hand. Soon it'll be helping hundreds. Your father would be so proud, she squeezed my fingers. Not of the success. Though that's wonderful, but of how you achieved it. You didn't let bitterness win. I learned from the best. I smiled. How are you feeling? Better every day. The doctors are very optimistic. My phone buzzed. A message from Nina about the merger negotiations. TechCorp was thrilled with the new direction. The deal would go through, bigger than ever. You know, Mom mused, Marcus Sterling never understood the most important thing about success. What's that? Real power isn't about controlling others. It's about lifting them up. That's how you build something lasting. Looking out at the sunset painting the city skyline, I thought about everything that had changed. Novatech was transforming from a burnout factory into a model of corporate responsibility. Families like mine wouldn't have to choose between work and caring for their loved ones. And somewhere, Marcus Sterling was learning that true leadership isn't about corner offices and magazine covers. By the way, Mom added casually, when do you plan to tell them about your new quantum encryption protocol? I grinned. Some things never changed. Mom still knew me better than anyone. One revolution at a time, I replied. For now, let's focus on getting you better. After all, I squeezed her hand. Family comes first. Years later, people would study the Novatech transformation as a business school case. They'd analyze the strategy, the timing, the execution. But they'd miss the most important lesson. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come from destroying your enemies, but from transforming their weapons into tools for healing. And sometimes, when you choose love over power, you end up changing not just a company, but an entire industry. As for me, I still work late sometimes, but now it's by choice, usually brainstorming new ways to make the world a little better, one innovation at a time. After all, that's what real success looks like. The night was bitter cold as I stood on our front porch, my thin jacket doing little to shield me from the harsh December wind. My father's words still rang in my ears, each syllable sharp as ice. Get out, he had said, his voice trembling with rage. You're no daughter of mine. My name is Amanda Chen, and at 17, I became everything my traditional Chinese-American parents feared. Pregnant, unmarried, and according to them, a disgrace to the family name. I watched through blurry eyes as my mother lingered by the window, her face a mask of disappointment before she turned away, letting the curtain fall. The message was clear. I was alone now. The few possessions I'd managed to grab were stuffed into my school backpack. Some clothes, my phone charger, and the positive pregnancy test that had shattered my family just hours ago. My hand instinctively went to my still flat stomach, protecting the life growing inside even as my own world crumbled around me. Jason, my boyfriend and the baby's father, had disappeared the moment I told him. No calls, no texts, nothing. Just radio silence and blocked social media accounts. The coward's way out. I made my way down the familiar street where I'd grown up, past the maple tree I used to climb and the garden my mother tended so carefully. Each step felt like leaving another piece of myself behind. The streetlights cast long shadows as tears froze on my cheeks. Mrs. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor, was the one who found me hours later, huddled on a park bench trying to stay warm. She had always been kind to me, sneaking me extra cookies when I was younger and teaching me Spanish phrases while she gardened. Oh, mi niña, she whispered when I told her everything through chattering teeth. Come inside before you freeze. Her small apartment was warm and smelled like cinnamon tea. She didn't judge or lecture, just listened as I poured out my fears between sobs. How could I raise a baby? Where would I live? What about school? The question seemed endless. One day at a time, she said firmly, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. First, you need a safe place to sleep. You'll stay here tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out the next step. That night, curled up on Mrs. Rodriguez's lumpy couch, I dreamed of my mother. In the dream, she was in her garden, carefully pruning her beloved roses. But as I watched, the flowers withered and died under her touch, crumbling to dust. I woke up crying. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me enroll in a program for pregnant teens, where I could continue my education while getting support and prenatal care. I found a job at a local diner, working the morning shift before classes. The hours were long and my feet ached constantly, but every dollar I earned went into a savings account for my baby. My parents never called. I would see my mother sometimes at the grocery store, but she would turn down another aisle, pretending not to notice me. My father's car would speed up if he passed me walking to work. It was like I had become a ghost in my own hometown, invisible to the people who had raised me. The other girls in my program became my lifeline. We shared our stories, our fears, and our dreams over lukewarm cafeteria food. Many of them had similar tales. Families who couldn't accept their choices, boyfriends who vanished, futures that seemed to shrink with each passing day. But something unexpected happened as my belly grew. I found strength I didn't know I had. Each kick from my baby reminded me that I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I studied harder than ever, determined to graduate despite my circumstances. The diner manager noticed my work ethic and gave me more responsibilities, along with a small raise. When I felt my baby move for the first time, I was alone in my tiny rented room, studying for a chemistry test. The flutter was so faint I almost missed it, like butterfly wings against my skin. I pressed my hand to the spot, tears flowing freely as I whispered, "Hello, little one. I'm your mom." It was a girl. The ultrasound technician pointed out her tiny features on the grainy screen, her spine, her heart, her perfect little profile. I asked for extra printouts, secretly hoping to share them with my parents. They sat in my bag for weeks before I finally threw them away, accepting that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me prepare for the baby's arrival, teaching me to knit tiny hats and booties. Her arthritis made her movements slow, but her stories kept me company as we worked. She told me about raising her own children as an immigrant, about the challenges she faced and overcame. "Life never gives you more than you can handle," she would say, her needles clicking steadily, even when it feels impossible. The contractions started during my final exam of senior year. I gritted my teeth through the pain, determined to finish the test before heading to the hospital. My water broke in the taxi, and 12 hours later, I held my daughter for the first time. Lely Marie Chen came into the world at 6:43 am on a Tuesday, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. She had a full head of dark hair and my mother's eyes. As I counted her tiny fingers and toes, memorizing every detail of her perfect face, I made her a promise. "You will never doubt that you're loved," I whispered. Never. Mrs. Rodriguez was my only visitor in the hospital. She brought homemade tamales and cooed over Lily in rapid Spanish. The nurses gave me sympathetic looks when no other family showed up, but I barely noticed. My whole world had narrowed to this small bundle in my arms. Graduation day fell 2 weeks after Lily's birth. I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with her strapped to my chest in a baby carrier, her weight a reminder of everything I fought for. There was no one in the audience cheering for me, but the other girls from my program whooped and hollered enough to make up for it. That summer passed in a haze of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. I moved into a tiny studio apartment barely big enough for a bed and Lily's crib. But it was ours, paid for with my own money. The walls were thin and the neighborhood wasn't great, but it was home. Every morning, I would wake before dawn to feed Lily before dropping her at the daycare center next to the diner. The owner, Maria, had a soft spot for young mothers and gave me a discount on childcare. I worked double shifts whenever I could, saving every extra penny for our future. Sometimes, on my walks home, I would pass my parents' house. The lights would be on, shadows moving behind the curtains, life continuing as if I had never existed. Once, I saw my mother in the garden, and for a moment our eyes met. She looked older, tired. But before I could raise my hand to wave, she turned away, just like that night on the porch. I cried myself to sleep that night, Lily's soft breathing the only sound in our tiny apartment. But in the morning, I got up, put on my uniform, and kept going, because that's what mothers do. The years would pass, each one bringing new challenges and triumphs. But that first year, the year I lost my family but found myself, that was the hardest. And as I rocked my daughter to sleep each night, I wondered if my mother ever thought of us, if she missed the granddaughter she'd never met. I had no way of knowing then that 15 years would pass before I heard my mother's voice again. That when the phone finally rang, everything would change. 15 years can change a lot. I had worked my way up from waitress to restaurant manager, eventually saving enough to open my own small cafe. Lily had grown from that tiny baby into a bright, confident teenager who filled our home with laughter and music. The night the call came, I was going over the cafe's monthly expenses while Lily practiced violin in her room. The unknown number flashing on my phone made me hesitate before answering. Amanda. The voice was older, more fragile than I remembered, but unmistakably my mother's. My hand tightened around the phone as memories flooded back. That cold December night, the turnbacks, the years of silence. Your father is dying, she said, her voice cracking. Cancer. The doctors say he has weeks, maybe days. He's asking for you and Lily. I sat there stunned as she continued. I know we don't deserve to ask anything of you, but please, he wants to meet his granddaughter before. She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. The violin music from Lily's room stopped, and I heard her footsteps in the hallway. Mom, who's on the phone? I covered the receiver with my hand. Just a work call, sweetie. Keep practicing. My mother must have heard her voice because she made a small, choked sound. She sounds lovely. She is, I said firmly, no thanks to you or Dad. The silence that followed was heavy with 15 years of unspoken words. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, I was wrong, Amanda. So terribly wrong. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. How many nights had I dreamed of hearing those words? How many times had I imagined this moment of acknowledgement? But now that it was here, I felt nothing but a deep, aching exhaustion. I need time to think, I said. And I need to talk to Lily. This isn't just about me anymore. Of course, my mother replied quickly. Just, please don't wait too long. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. The cafe's paperwork lay forgotten as memories crashed over me like waves. The day I told them I was pregnant. The look of disgust on my father's face. My mother's silence, perhaps more painful than his rage. Lily appeared in the doorway, violin still in hand. At 15, she looked so much like I had at her age. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin. But where I had been uncertain, she carried herself with quiet confidence. That wasn't a work call, was it? She asked, setting her violin down. You're crying. I touched my cheek, surprised to find it wet. No, it wasn't. Come sit down, sweetheart. There's something we need to talk about. She listened quietly as I told her about my parents, about that night 15 years ago, about all the things I'd never had the courage to share before. Her face remained thoughtful, processing each detail with a maturity that made my heart ache. So my grandfather is dying, she said when I finished, and he wants to meet me. I nodded, watching her carefully. Yes, but it's completely your choice. We don't owe them anything. Lily was quiet for a long moment, absently plucking at a loose thread on her sleeve. I want to go, she said finally. Not for them, but for you. You deserve closure, Mom. I pulled her into a tight hug, marveling at how wise my daughter had become. When did you get so smart? She grinned against my shoulder. Must be all those books you make me read. The next morning, I called my mother back. Her answer was immediate, as if she'd been sitting by the phone waiting. We'll come, I said, keeping my voice steady. Tomorrow afternoon, but I have conditions. Anything, she breathed. First, this is about Lily. If Dad says one word, one single word, to make her feel unwelcome or unwanted, we leave. Second, I won't pretend the past didn't happen. No swept under the rug family reunion. And third, I took a deep breath. You need to hear our story. All of it. Everything you missed while you were pretending we didn't exist. There was a pause, then a soft, yes, of course. I spent that night going through old photos. Lily's first steps, her first day of school, dance recitals, violin concerts, 15 years of memories they had chosen to miss. Each picture was a reminder of how much we'd accomplished on our own, but also of how much they had lost. Mrs. Rodriguez had passed away 5 years ago, but I still had the first baby hat she'd knitted for Lily. I packed it with the photos, a tangible piece of the woman who had been more family to us than our own blood. The drive to my parents' house the next day felt surreal. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same neat lawns, same trimmed hedges. My mother's roses still bloomed in the front garden, though they looked a bit wild now, less carefully tended. Lily squeezed my hand as we walked up the familiar path to the front door. "Ready?" she asked. I looked at my beautiful, strong daughter and felt a surge of pride. Ready. The door opened before we could knock. My mother stood there, smaller than I remembered, her hair now more gray than black. Her hands trembled as she reached toward me, then dropped to her sides. "Amanda," she whispered. "You came." Her eyes moved to Lily, widening slightly. I saw the recognition there, the sharp intake of breath as she noticed all the ways my daughter resembled her younger self. "Would you like to come in?" she asked, stepping aside. I nodded, guiding Lily forward with a hand on her back. As we crossed the threshold, I couldn't help but remember the last time I'd walked through this door, young, scared, and alone. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't that helpless teenager anymore. And this time, I wasn't alone. The inside of my childhood home felt smaller than I remembered. Family photos still lined the hallway walls, but they stopped abruptly at my senior year. The last ones taken before everything fell apart. It was like time had frozen in this house, preserving the moment just before their perfect family shattered. My father was in the living room, propped up in a hospital bed that seemed out of place among the familiar furniture. The strong, imposing man who had thrown me out 15 years ago was gone, replaced by someone frail and diminished. His eyes, though, were the same, dark and intense as they fixed on Lily. "So," he said, his voice rough, "this is my granddaughter." Lily stepped forward, her chin lifted slightly. "I'm Lily," she said clearly. "It's nice to meet you, though I wish it hadn't taken so long." I saw my father flinch at her words, but a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Direct, like your mother," he said. "Please sit down. Both of you." My mother hurried to arrange chairs, her movements nervous and jerky. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, my father spoke again. "I owe you both an apology," he said, "though I know it's far too late." 15 years too late, I agreed, my voice steady. "Do you know what it was like, being 17, pregnant and homeless in winter, having to rely on the kindness of neighbors because my own parents threw me away?" My mother made a small, pained sound. "Amanda, we were trying to." "To what?" I cut her off. "To protect the family name, to teach me a lesson." "Well, congratulations." The lesson I learned was that I could never count on either of you. I pulled out the stack of photos I'd brought, spreading them across the bed. "This is what you missed. Lily's first steps, her first day of kindergarten, every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone you chose not to be part of." They leaned forward, hungry for these glimpses of the life they'd ignored. My mother's hand trembled as she touched a photo of Lily in her first ballet costume. "You look just like your mother did at that age," she whispered to Lily. "I wouldn't now," Lily replied quietly. "I don't have any pictures of Mom from back then." The silence that followed was deafening. My father picked up a photo of Lily's elementary school graduation, where she'd won the Academic Achievement Award. "You did well with her," he said finally. "Better than we did with you." "I did everything you said I couldn't," I said. "Finished high school, built a career, raised an amazing daughter, all without your help or approval. And I own my own business now," I continued. "The cafe on Maple Street, that's mine. I worked my way up from waitress to owner. Funny how the daughter you were so ashamed of turned out to be successful after all." My father's face crumpled, and for the first time in my life, I saw tears in his eyes. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "So terribly wrong. My pride, my stupid, stubborn pride cost me my daughter and my granddaughter." "Yes, it did," I agreed. "But that's not why we're here today. We're here because Lily deserves to know where she comes from, even if that history isn't pretty. And because I hesitated, then continued, because despite everything, you're still my parents." My mother reached for my hand, and this time, I let her take it. Her fingers were cold and shaking. "Can you ever forgive us?" she asked. I looked at Lily, who had been watching this exchange with quiet intensity. "That depends," I said. "Are you ready to be real grandparents? to show up for recitals, to remember birthdays, to be there when we need you. Because if this is just about easing your conscience before Dad dies, then no, I won't put Lily through that. I don't have much time left, my father said softly, but your mother does. And I've made her promise to do better, to be there in all the ways we should have been before. Lily stood up suddenly. I have a violin competition next week, she announced. First chair in the youth symphony. Will you come, grandmother? My mother's face lit up even as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course. Over the next few weeks, as my father's condition deteriorated, we began the slow, careful work of rebuilding bridges. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, of old hurts resurfaces, of harsh words that needed to be said. But there were also moments of healing. My mother came to the cafe, proudly telling customers that her daughter was the owner. She attended Lily's violin competition, beaming from the audience. She even helped us plant a small herb garden behind the cafe, teaching Lily the gardening skills I'd never let her teach me. My father held on long enough to see Lily perform a private violin concert in his room, her music filling the house with something that felt like forgiveness. He died peacefully the next day, holding both our hands. At the funeral, I stood between my mother and daughter, thinking about the long, twisted path that had led us here. The years of pain and silence, the strength I'd found in solitude, the daughter who had taught me more about love and resilience than my parents ever had. What happens now? Lily asked later as we sat in our apartment above the cafe. I looked at my mother, who had come home with us, who was learning to be the grandmother she should have been all along. Now, I said, we write a new story, together. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the 17-year-old girl standing alone in the cold, thinking her life was over. I wish I could tell her that she was stronger than she knew, that she would build a beautiful life from the ashes of what was lost. But mostly, I wish I could tell her that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most meaningful destinations. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it can mean finding peace. And that love, even when it seems completely broken, has a way of coming full circle. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Lunch tomorrow? I'd love to hear more about your high school years with Lily. I smiled as I typed back, yes, there's so much to tell. Because that's the thing about family, sometimes you have to lose it to find it again. Sometimes you have to break apart completely before you can rebuild something stronger. And sometimes, just sometimes, 15 years isn't too long to wait for a second chance. Growing up in Maple Grove Estates, I never quite felt like I belonged. The massive houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and luxury cars in every driveway seemed to mock our modest living situation. I'm Emma Mitchell, and my story begins with a barbecue that changed everything. My parents, Thomas and Linda Mitchell, moved into 156 Maple Drive when I was just 5 years old. Back then, the neighborhood was different, warmer, more welcoming. But as property values skyrocketed and wealthy families moved in, the spirit of community slowly eroded into something cold and exclusive. Our house stood out like a sore thumb. While others renovated and expanded, we maintained our simple 2-story home the best we could. Dad worked as a high school teacher, and Mom ran a small flower shop downtown. We weren't poor, but compared to our neighbors, we might as well have been living in poverty. Sarah Henderson, who lived in the mansion next door, never missed an opportunity to remind us of our place in the social hierarchy. Her husband James, CEO of a tech company, would smirk from behind his imported cigars whenever we crossed paths. They represented everything wrong with what Maple Grove had become: wealth without warmth, success without soul. The annual neighborhood barbecue had always been a tradition, dating back decades. This year, it was the Hendersons' turn to host. Mom didn't want to go, but Dad insisted we maintain appearances. "We have as much right to be here as anyone else," he'd said, straightening his collar in the mirror. If only he knew how right he was. That afternoon, I helped Mom prepare her famous potato salad. "Maybe this year will be different," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I nodded, not believing it either. As we walked next door, carrying our contribution to the potluck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The Hendersons' backyard was packed with the neighborhood alight. Women in designer sundresses clustered around the pool, while men in polo shirts discussed stock portfolios and golf handicaps. Sarah spotted us immediately, her perfectly Botox face twisting into a practiced smile. "Oh, the Mitchells," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "How nice of you to join us. Linda, dear, you can put that." She gestured vaguely at Mom's potato salad. "Over there with the other dishes." I watched Mom's face flush as she placed her carefully prepared dish among the catered spreads. Dad squeezed her hand, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. We found seats at an empty table near the edge of the party. The only empty table, I realized with a sinking feeling. As the afternoon wore on, the subtle jabs became more frequent and less subtle. Sarah's voice carried across the yard as she discussed property values with her equally wealthy friends. "It's just that some properties really bring down the neighborhood's appeal," she said, looking pointedly at our house. "Don't you agree, James?" James Henderson lowered his crystal tumbler of scotch and nodded sagely. "Absolutely, darling. We've discussed this with the Homeowners Association. Perhaps it's time to implement some new standards." My blood boiled, but years of enduring their condescension had taught me to keep my composure. I was about to suggest to my parents that we leave when I noticed an unfamiliar figure walking up the Hendersons' driveway. The man wore an impeccable suit that made even James's designer outfit look cheap. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with purpose. As he approached the gathering, conversations quieted and heads turned. "I'm looking for Emma Mitchell," he denounced, his voice clear and professional. Sarah's eyebrows shot up as I stood. "That's me," I said, trying to ignore the whispers that erupted around us. The man nodded and extended his hand. "Jonathan Pierce, from Pierce & Associates Law Firm. I represent the estate of Harold Montgomery. Might we speak privately?" The name hit me like a thunderbolt. Harold Montgomery, my grandfather, whom I'd never met. He'd had a falling out with my father decades ago, long before I was born. All I knew about him came from old photographs and whispered conversations. Sarah, unable to contain herself, sashayed over. "Now surely any business can wait until after our little gathering," she said, placing herself between me and Mr. Pierce. We wouldn't want to disrupt the party. Mr. Pierce's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I'm afraid this matter is rather urgent, Mrs. Henderson. Or should I say, tenant?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's perfect smile faltered. "I beg your pardon. Perhaps we should all sit down," Mr. Pierce suggested, opening his briefcase. "This concerns the entire neighborhood, actually." The next few minutes felt surreal as Mr. Pierce explained that my grandfather, Harold Montgomery, had been the actual owner of all of Maple Grove Estates. He purchased the land decades ago but chose to live elsewhere, allowing a management company to handle the properties. The Hendersons, like everyone else, had been renting from him all these years through a complex network of shell companies. "Your grandfather passed away last month," Mr. Pierce continued, addressing me directly. "In his will, he left the entire estate, including all of Maple Grove, to you, Miss Mitchell." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face had gone pale, her manicured hand clutching James' arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Around us, our neighbors stared in shocked disbelief. "That's impossible," James sputtered, finally finding his voice. "We own this house. We have the deed." "You have a carefully crafted lease agreement," Mr. Pierce corrected, producing a stack of documents. "Your monthly property taxes have actually been rent payments." Mr. Montgomery was quite brilliant in how he structured everything. I sat there, struggling to process what I was hearing. The house I'd grown up in, the neighborhood that had made me feel so inferior, it had all belonged to my grandfather. And now, somehow, it all belonged to me. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, her voice rising. "We've lived here for 15 years. We've invested hundreds of thousands in renovations, all of which were approved through the management company as per your lease agreement," Mr. Pierce replied calmly. "Miss Mitchell now has full discretion over all properties in Maple Grove Estates." I looked at my parents, who appeared equally stunned. Dad's face showed a mix of emotions: shock, confusion, and something else. Pride? Regret? I couldn't quite tell. "If you'll excuse us," Mr. Pierce said, standing, "Miss Mitchell and I have some paperwork to discuss. Shall we use your study, Mrs. Henderson? After all, it is Miss Mitchell's property now." As I followed Mr. Pierce into the house, I heard the party dissolving into chaos behind me. Sarah's voice rose above the others, demanding answers, making threats about lawyers and lawsuits. But for the first time in my life, her words had no power over me. Inside the Hendersons' study, Mr. Pierce laid out the full scope of my inheritance. The neighborhood was just the beginning. There were other properties, investments, and accounts I needed to know about. But my mind kept returning to one detail. Did he know? I asked suddenly. My grandfather, did he know how they treated us? Mr. Pierce's expression softened slightly. Mr. Montgomery had eyes and ears everywhere, Miss Mitchell. He watched you grow up from afar, saw how you and your parents handled adversity with grace. In his final years, he spoke often of how proud he was of the family you'd become. Tears welled up in my eyes as I thought of the grandfather I'd never known, watching over us all these years. Outside, I could hear the party completely falling apart as neighbors rushed to their phones, presumably to call their lawyers. What happens now? I asked, wiping my eyes. That, Miss Mitchell, is entirely up to you. The properties, the leases, the future of Maple Grove, it's all in your hands. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. The Hendersons had spent years making us feel small, but now the tables had turned. The real question was, what kind of landlord did I want to be? The next morning, I woke up to chaos. News of my inheritance had spread through Maple Grove like wildfire. My phone was flooded with messages, some congratulatory, others panicked, and many from neighbors suddenly wanting to reconnect. Sarah Henderson's number appeared repeatedly, her voicemails growing increasingly desperate. James had apparently spent the night calling every lawyer in the city, only to discover that my grandfather's legal team had ironclad documentation for everything. I sat at our kitchen table, watching Mom prepare breakfast like any other morning. But everything felt different now. Dad kept glancing at the window, where a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, presumably hoping to catch a glimpse of the neighborhood's new owner. "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" Mom asked, placing a plate of pancakes in front of me. I took a deep breath. "I'm thinking about Grandpa, why he did this, what he wanted me to learn." I paused, cutting into my pancakes, and I'm thinking about all the families like us who got pushed out of this neighborhood over the years. Dad looked up from his coffee. "Your grandfather, he was a complicated man, Emma. We had our differences, but he always had a strong sense of justice." A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Mr. Pierce stood there, looking fresh despite the early hour. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I thought you might want to review the current lease terms. There are some interesting clauses we should discuss." As we went through the documents, a picture emerged that made me smile. My grandfather hadn't just been a shrewd businessman, he'd been playing a long game. The leases all contained provisions that gave the owner extraordinary control over rental terms and community standards. "So," I said, looking up from a particularly interesting clause, "I could essentially rewrite the entire rental agreement." "With proper notice, yes," Mr. Pierce confirmed. "Your grandfather ensured maximum flexibility for the property owner." I spent the next few hours drafting new terms with Mr. Pierce's help. By afternoon, we had everything ready. I called for a mandatory community meeting at the neighborhood clubhouse, another property I now owned. The clubhouse was packed that evening. Every resident of Maple Grove had shown up, their faces a mix of worry and curiosity. Sarah and James Henderson sat in the front row, trying to maintain their usual air of superiority despite their obvious distress. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the podium. "As you've heard, I'm now your landlord. I've spent the day reviewing everyone's lease agreements and I've decided to make some changes." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah's hand shot up immediately, but I continued speaking. "First, all current rents will be adjusted based on a fair market value assessment, not the inflated rates many of you have been paying. Second, I'm establishing a community board that will include representatives from all income levels. And third," I paused, making eye contact with Sarah, "any form of discrimination or harassment based on economic status will result in immediate lease termination." The room erupted. James Henderson jumped to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't just change everything overnight. We have rights." "Actually, Mr. Henderson," Mr. Pierce interjected smoothly, "according to your lease agreement, she can. Would you like to review the terms you signed 15 years ago?" As James sputtered, I continued, "I'm not interested in revenge. What I want is to restore this neighborhood to what it was meant to be, a community where people of different backgrounds can live together with respect." I pulled out another document, which brings me to the Hendersons. "Sarah, James, I've reviewed the numerous complaints against you from other residents. The hostile environment you've created, the discriminatory comments, the attempts to force out families who don't meet your standards, it all violates your lease terms. Sarah's face had gone from red to white. You wouldn't dare. I'm exercising my right to terminate your lease, effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the property. The silence that followed was broken by a small sound. Someone was clapping. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon half the room was applauding. I saw relief on faces I recognized from years of shared subtle humiliations at the Hendersons' hands. This isn't over, James threatened, standing to leave. Our lawyers will. Your lawyers will find that everything is perfectly legal, Mr. Pierce interrupted. Miss Mitchell, should I show them the documentation your grandfather kept of their lease violations over the years? The Hendersons stormed out, but I wasn't done. One more thing, I announced to the remaining residents. I'm establishing a scholarship fund for local students in a community improvement program. The focus will be on making Maple Grove accessible to families of all income levels while maintaining a quality of life for everyone. Over the next few months, Maple Grove transformed. The Hendersons moved out, their mansion converted into a community center with after-school programs. Other wealthy residents who couldn't accept the changes followed, making room for new families who brought fresh energy to the neighborhood. We kept our modest house exactly as it was, though Mom finally got the garden she'd always wanted. Dad retired from teaching but volunteered at the community center, mentoring kids who reminded him of his younger self. One evening, as I sat on our porch watching children play on lawns that had once been off-limits, I found an old photograph in my grandfather's papers. It showed him standing in front of Maple Grove decades ago, when it was just empty land. On the back, he'd written, "Build something that matters." Sarah Henderson still lives in the city. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store, driving a much more modest car these days. She always looks away quickly, but I notice she no longer carries herself with that same arrogant pride. Last week, I received a letter from a young girl who recently moved into the neighborhood with her single mother. "Thank you," she wrote, "for making a place where we don't have to feel ashamed." I keep that letter on my desk, next to my grandfather's photo. He built something that mattered, all right, not just properties and investments, but a legacy of justice. And now it was my turn to carry it forward. The wealth he left me wasn't just in real estate and bank accounts. It was in the lesson he taught me through this inheritance. True richness isn't measured by the size of your house or the car you drive, but by the community you build and the lives you touch. As I watch Maple Grove flourish, growing more diverse and vibrant with each passing day, I think about how sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in making others suffer, but in creating something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. And in the end, that's worth more than all the mansions in the world.